Chapter 1991. Shen Manting's heart raced when she saw the words that popped up on her phone. Almost reflexively, he looked around. Soon, she saw a figure coming up from behind. The figure was tall, but much thinner than the last time she saw him. He had lost weight. He was obviously thinner. Shen Manting's heart ached slightly, but she reacted quickly and immediately got up. She subconsciously wanted to leave. However, Shen Luo quickly stepped forward and chased after her. Shen Manting ran faster when she heard the movement behind her, but there was still a huge gap in strength. Shen Luo caught up with her in a short while and grabbed her hand. Shen Manting was shocked and immediately flung her hand away as if she had been electrocuted. However, her hand was held tightly and didn't move at all. "Why are you here?" Shen Luo looked at her and frowned. "I told you, it's useless for you to regret it. Why did you come here and leave as soon as you saw me?" "Why? What could she do?" Shen Manting looked at Shen Luo and opened her mouth. She wanted to speak, but she didn't know what to say. She wanted to see her child. She wanted to see her baby. That seemed to be the right thing to do. But Shen Manting didn't dare to say it. Shen Manting pulled her hand away and lowered her head. "I just passed by and thought of sitting here." "Passing by?" Shen Luo was amused. "The capital is so big. Why don't you pass by in the 5th or 4th ring? Can you afford to live in a house here in your current situation? Don't you think you're deliberately extending yourself here?" Shen Luo's words were sharp. Shen Manting only felt a burst of pain in her heart, and her eyes were a little sore. She pulled her hand back and said in a low voice, "It's none of your business. It's not like you own this place. Did I offend you by sitting here?" Shen Luo was speechless for a moment. Indeed, it didn't bother him. But as soon as he saw her, he couldn't control himself. God knew that when he saw her just now, Shen Luo felt that his heart was about to jump out. After staring at her for a while, he finally mustered up the courage to send a message to confirm. After seeing her pick up her phone, he came forward. He was afraid that he would be scolded as a psychopath like the previous few times. "Do you want to see the child?" Shen Luo asked. "Yes." He was thinking like a madman. Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat, and she looked up at him. However, he didn't dare to say a word. He had said not to regret it. She now regretted it. Shen Luo was right in front of her. Shen Manting could imagine that there would be a round of humiliation. "The baby is fine," Shen Luo interrupted her. "He's growing more and more adorable. He's eating well and sleeping well. He's spending more and more time awake. Don't worry, I'll take good care of him." This string of words was spoken in a calm voice. It was just a statement. However, Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat. The unbearable surging sourness surged up in an instant. The baby was fine, but she couldn't even see it. Shen Luo noticed the change in her expression. He turned his face away and said, "I've told you about the child's recent situation. Don't pass by again in the future. There are people here who know you. It'll be embarrassing if they see you." Was he saying that she was an embarrassment? Shen Manting looked up angrily at his back and shouted, "Shen Luo!" Chapter 1992. Shen Manting struggled in silence for a long time before she found her voice. Her heart ached and she said with difficulty, "I want to see the baby." Shen Luo's back was facing her. When he heard this, he inexplicably breathed a sigh of relief. He straightened his body slightly and then turned sideways. He saw Shen Manting's blushing face and seemed to be ashamed. He felt a little complicated, but his face was serious. He stared at her and said slowly, "I said that as long as you don't go back that day, the child will have nothing to do with you in the future." "That's not up to you." Shen Manting looked up and clenched her fists slightly. "I gave birth to the baby. I won't abandon him. But you didn't come back that day." Shen Luo faced her with a somewhat sarcastic smile on his face. "I begged you so much, but you still refused to come back. Now you have the cheek to say that you want this child?" Shen Manting frowned and looked up. "You?" A man's words carry weight. Shen Luo looked at her. "Unlike you women, who only know how to move your lips. As for the rest, haha." He looked up and down at Shen Manting with disdain. "You can't do anything. I didn't say that I don't want this child. Shen Manting's face was full of anger. You have acquiesced. Now the child is in my hands, and I have the chat records here. Even if you go to the court will only award the child to me. Then I also have custody. You don't. Shen Luo and replied coldly and glanced at her. Don't you feel ashamed when you say that? Shen Luo and Shen Manting lowered her head slightly and said in a choked voice, I didn't come back to quarrel with you. Now I want to see the child, just one look. One look? I can show you the photo, Shen Luoan said and actually picked up the phone. Shen Manting subconsciously looked at it with desire in her eyes. He had a photo, but she didn't even have a photo. Shen Luo and had been watching her. He looked through it and then handed the phone to her. Shen Manting subconsciously wanted to take it, but Shen Luo and didn't let go. Give it to me, Shen Manting said anxiously. Let me see. This is a cell phone. It's a valuable item. What if you take it away? Shen Luoan's voice was calm, but his words were extremely insulting. Shen Manting was so angry that her neck and eyes turned red. You're such a despicable person. Even if I were poor, I wouldn't steal your cell phone. Shen Luo and didn't continue the conversation. He raised his eyelids, held the phone in his hand, and said, Do you want to see it? Shen Manting resisted the urge to look at him. It was Little Moon. There were only a few wrinkled and red photos on her phone, but the video on Shen Luoan's phone showed that the baby had grown up a lot. Her little face was white and tender, becoming very smooth. In the video on the phone, the baby's mouth was slightly open, and he was sucking on his little finger. Saliva was dripping from the corner of his mouth. Oh my, it's dirty. Mrs. Shen's voice. Shen Manting's vision blurred when she heard this voice after a long time. He rubbed his eyes and stared at her. The baby's finger was pulled out, bringing along a silver thread. His little tongue moved, and then his little face wrinkled. He was about to cry. Soon he was carried up, and Mrs. Shen's figure appeared in the mirror. Chapter 1993. Although Mrs. Shen said so, she didn't step aside. She picked up the bottle that had been prepared beside her, tested the temperature, and stuffed it into the baby's mouth. The baby looked like he was about to cry, but he was gone in an instant. He sucked on the bottle, clenched his fists, held the bottle, and sucked in big mouthfuls. Mrs. Shen held Little Moon in her arms, and there was a happy smile on her face. What a happy family. Shen Manting felt very complicated. Looking at the baby in the video, her desire to get close to him and hug him grew stronger. Are you done? Shen Luo and put the phone away. Shen Manting was anxious and reached out to grab it. However, she grabbed Shen Luo's other hand. He put his hand in front of her and looked at her indifferently. Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat, and she withdrew her hand guiltily. Leave if you're done, Shen Luoan said rudely and kicked the phone back into his pocket. I have to go home to see my son. His words were very tempting to Shen Manting. She also wanted to see the baby, and she also wanted to see Little Moon. But how could she say it? Shen Manting's lips moved, but she still didn't say a word. Shen Luoan glanced at her, then turned around and walked away. He didn't hesitate, and he didn't stop. Shen Manting watched as he walked further and further away, and her heart became more and more empty. Shen Manting followed him silently, and she crossed her arms and looked at his back. Shen Luoan seemed to notice it, and he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Shen Manting didn't avoid him. She walked forward, lowered her head slightly and said, Shen Luoan, I want to see him. Haven't you finished watching? Shen Luoan didn't turn around, and his back was facing her. What else do you want? You know that I don't just want to watch the video. Shen Manting bit her lower lip, and her voice gradually trembled and choked with sobs. I haven't seen him for a long time. Shen Luoan pulled a long face. You asked for it. With that he sneered, and then walked forward quickly. His pace was more than twice as fast as before. Shen Manting knew that she was in the wrong, but the desire to see the baby in her heart grew stronger. She looked at him and followed silently. Hey! A neighbor was surprised to see Shen Manting. Manting, you're back. Shen Manting's face stiffened, and she stopped moving. Shen Luo and kept walking in the direction of his house. For some reason, Shen Manting felt a chill run down her spine when she looked at her neighbor. He didn't chase her away, but Shen Manting's footsteps seemed to be frozen at this moment. His figure went further and further away, and soon he disappeared. The neighbor looked at Shen Manting, then at Shen Luoan, and asked, "Did they quarrel?" When he took a closer look, he exclaimed, "Io, why does your complexion look so bad? You've lost so much weight. You used to be chubby." Shen Manting felt her entire body stiffen. She quickly turned around and said, "You've got the wrong person." Then he quickly walked back. His footsteps were getting faster and faster, faster and faster, and finally he was running. Her heart was beating fast, and she was gasping for breath. Tears were already streaming down her cheeks. He calmed himself down, wiped his eyes, and immediately took the subway back. Shen Luo, and didn't look back as he walked. He didn't know when Shen Manting had stopped following him. Chapter 1994. He didn't know why, but he suddenly couldn't hold his breath any longer. Standing at his door, Shen Luo sat down on the steps. The wind blew gently, and the flowers in the courtyard swayed. Spring was here. The surroundings were filled with lush greenery. The flowers that should have bloomed had all bloomed. Those who were supposed to be defeated had been defeated. He didn't know how long he had been sitting on the steps, watching the sun get smaller and smaller. He actually felt a little like a lunatic. Heh! Shen Luoan stood up, patted the dust and muttered to himself, "Isn't that a lunatic?" He turned around and entered the house. As soon as he entered, he heard Little Moon crying loudly. Seeing Shen Luoan return, Nanny He, who was at her wit's end, finally breathed a sigh of relief and said, Come and hug your son. He's crying so hard that he didn't pee or defecate. He won't even drink milk. I don't know what's wrong with him." Shen Luoan took it and stared at the baby for a long time. He slowly said, "He probably misses Mom." "Stop it." Nanny He rebuked. "He doesn't even know who Mom is. How can he miss Mom? Please don't catch a cold. When Madam comes back later, let her take a look at him." But it was amazing. After Shen Luoan hugged the baby for a while, Little Moon's crying gradually subsided and he started to hiccup. Nanny He teased, "I don't think he misses Mom. He misses Dad." Little Moon stopped crying and stared at Shen Luoan with his dark watery eyes. "Are you hungry?" Shen Luoan held the baby with one hand and stood up to get the bottle for him. The milk in the bottle was freshly brewed, so the temperature was just right. He stuffed it into the baby's mouth and he immediately hugged it. Shen Luoan was usually tired from work and in a bad mood. As long as he came home and saw the baby and hugged him, he would naturally relax. But today, he couldn't relax no matter what. After coaxing the baby to sleep, Shen Luoan sat on the bed in a daze. After a while, he went out. Shen Jielia and his wife sat in the living room, snuggling together and looking at their phones. Yi Qianqian occasionally reached out to tap on the screen. When she saw Shen Luoan, she said, "Big brother, it's almost time to eat." "Okay." Shen Luoan responded and then sat down. He picked up an orange and started to peel it. Shen Jilia's eyes were glued to the phone, but he didn't forget to glance up at Shen Jilia. Then, he quickly put down his phone and said with a serious face, "Brother, I have good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?" "It's bad," Shen Luoan replied. "In that case, I'll tell you the good news first." Yi Qianqian was speechless. Shen Luoan glanced at him. "What?" "I found out that Sister Manting is still alive. I contacted her yesterday and planned to arrange a job for her in the capital. I just didn't have the time to tell you." Shen Jilia coughed lightly, looking a little embarrassed. Shen Luoan paused in the act of peeling an orange and looked up at him. "Did you call Shen Manting over?" Yi Qianqian and Shen Jilia's eyes widened when they heard Shen Luoan's question. Yi Qianqian asked, "Big brother, do you already know?" "Yeah." Shen Luoan tossed the orange peel away. "I saw it in the park." "Ah." Yi Qianqian was even more shocked. "But wasn't she still in Jiangsu yesterday? She said she would only be back in a few days." Chapter 1995. The bad news is. Shen Luoan hesitated and glanced at Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian cleared her throat and said, "It was his idea, not mine." Hey, you sold your husband so quickly. Shen Jilia reached out to hold her in his arms and said, we asked her to come to the capital and arranged a job for her in marketing or research. But I don't have such a job here. Brother, you. Shen Luoan squeezed the juice out of the orange in his hand. The fragrance of oranges filled the air. Yi Qianqian was envious of the fruits. She picked one up and started to peel it herself. Shen Jilia felt a little uncomfortable under her gaze. He coughed lightly and said, in any case, you can just arrange for one of them. If it doesn't work out, I'll have no choice but to look for Yang Yi. Yang Yi had been one of Shen Jilia's brothers for many years. Although their relationship wasn't as close as Luo Rant's, it was still passable. Right now, he was running a small logistics company. It wasn't big, but it was pretty decent. Working at Yang Ye's place is actually pretty good. It's just that it's a little tiring. Recently, he often works overtime and doesn't have enough sleep. He's so skinny that he looks like a dried corpse. When Shen Luoan heard this, he couldn't bring himself to eat the orange in his hand. He threw it into the dustbin and said coldly, why are you so nosy? What does this have to do with you? Shen Manting is willing to be self-reliant. What's the difference between you and Charity? Do you think she will accept it? Of course not. The poorer a person was, the more proud they were. He had always thought that he was unyielding and didn't need any external help. Otherwise, it would be considered as charity and food given in destitution. In particular, Shen Manting had some mental problems. Her brain circuitry was not something that normal people like them could understand. When Shen Jilia heard Shen Luoan's words, he pursed his lips and said, that's not true. She has to work too. It's not like she's afraid to do anything and just sit there doing nothing. That's called charity. Heh! Shen Luoan stood up and looked at him. You don't know anything about Shen Manting. If she finds out that you've tricked her into coming here, she'll probably be disgusted by the sight of you, not to mention the job you've introduced her to you. After saying that, he turned around and went into the bathroom. The sound of running water could be heard. Yi Qianqian and Shen Jilia looked at each other. Shen Luoan felt extremely irritated. He hadn't seen Shen Manting for a long time, and when he suddenly saw her today, he felt a little sorry for her. Not that he felt sorry for her, but for himself. Pathetic and pitiful. He was clearly a man, but he was so lowly that his mood was controlled by a woman. When she mentioned that she wanted to see the child, he actually thought, why don't we just leave it at that? Let her see the child. Maybe after seeing it, she wouldn't bear to leave. However, this thought only lasted for a moment. In the end, this thought was overcome by reason. He was still so calm that he was cruel. Shen Luoan, you big fool. He washed his face and went out. Dinner was ready. After dinner, Shen Luoan returned to his room. The baby was very obedient, very obedient. He had been sleeping obediently for more than an hour. More than once, he wondered if it was because he knew his mother wasn't by his side that he was so quiet and rarely cried. He picked up his phone and thought for a moment. He typed a line of words in the chat window with Shen Manting, let's meet up. However, after thinking about it, he decided to delete it. He threw the phone aside and lay down. I encountered a small unpleasant incident that affected my mood, so it's even later. I'll make 2 updates before 1 o'clock. Chapter 1996. Shen Luoan closed his eyes. Before long, he heard his phone vibrate. Manting. Let's meet. Shen Luoan was stunned for a while when he saw these words. He stared at it for a while and subconsciously wanted to reply. Okay. However, his eyes suddenly moved up and saw a row of messages. Every row was green, and every row was sent out by him. He had sent so many messages, but she hadn't even replied once. Shen Luoan was suddenly angry. He deleted the word and then replied, what's the matter? Shen Manting could almost imagine what kind of expression he had on his face when he said those 3 words. Distant and indifferent. It must be cold. It was the kind of coldness when looking at an enemy. Shen Manting was a little timid. If she asked him to meet, she would have to endure his sarcasm. If she mentioned the baby, would he say, you didn't want the baby, I gave you a chance? Then, he would dismiss her with 1 sentence? Shen Manting felt her heart beat heavy and slow. She looked at the 3 words for a long time and then replied, I think we need to talk. Shen Luoan. I have nothing to talk to you about. The baby is mine. Shen Manting's heart trembled, and it was cold. This man was unbelievably heartless. Shen Manting. I gave birth to the baby. Shen Luoan. Didn't you say you didn't want it? The expected conversation was neither nutritious nor contentious. But it made Shen Manting stunned for a long time. Shen Manting was overwhelmed with sadness. She sat on the bed in a daze, and her heart sank. Ding dong. It was a WeChat notification. Shen Luoan, if you can't eat, I can treat you to a meal. At 11 o'clock tomorrow, I will take the baby out to bask in the sun. Come over if you want to eat. Shen Manting was delighted and immediately replied. Okay. After a while, Shen Luoan replied. Are you so poor? Has your dignity been eaten by a dog? Shen Manting's heart hurt, and she didn't want to reply. She threw the phone away and went to wash off the dust on her body. The next day, Shen Manting woke up at 7 o'clock. It would take an hour and a half to get there, which meant that she had an hour to tidy up. She took out the dress that she had treasured. The spring weather was just right to wear this long-sleeved dress. However, the dress she was wearing now was obviously a little too big. It looked wide and hung loosely on his body, not very fitting. However, she did not have a better dress. She carefully took out her old cosmetics. Although it had been some time, it shouldn't have expired. This was the first time she dressed up and put on makeup seriously since she left the Shen family. She looked into the mirror and saw another high-spirited Shen Manting. Good, perfect. The child had started to grow up. What if the child remembered her? Even if she couldn't have the baby, she still wanted to leave a good impression on him. She left the house and took the subway. Unlike yesterday, at this moment, many people on the train would look at Shen Manting. After arriving, she carried her bag and walked to the park. 10:50. Today's weather was very good. There were strong old men and women walking, playing ball games, and exercising together. The flowers were red and the grass was green. Shen Manting sat on the same bench as yesterday. She couldn't help but look around for fear that she might miss Shen Luoan. However, after waiting for a full 20 minutes, they finally saw Shen Luoan. Chapter 1997. Shen Manting was slightly taken aback and subconsciously looked behind her. However, it was really only Shen Luoan. Where's the baby? Shen Manting frowned and felt that she had been deceived. Didn't you say that you brought the baby out to bask in the sun? The sun is so hot at this time. Do you want to burn the baby to death? Shen Luoan looked at her coldly and then looked her up and down. You were like a village woman yesterday. Are you planning to sell yourself today? Shen Manting heard this and almost rushed up to strangle him. She gritted her teeth and scolded him angrily. You lied to me, Shen Luoan. Are you still a man? The old people in the park heard her voice and couldn't help but look over. Shen Luoan glanced at her disapprovingly and said, You know better than anyone whether I'm a man or not. His casual words easily stirred up the dark memories hidden in the depths of her mind. Shen Manting's face turned pale and she turned to leave. Her heart felt as if it had been stabbed by many sharp arrows. It was full of dense bloody holes. Shen Luoan stood in front of her and reached out to grab her bag. He said, Aren't you going to eat? Let's go. I'll treat you. There's nothing delicious to eat with you. Shen Manting's shoulders were trembling with anger. Her eyes were slightly red and she said angrily, Seeing you makes me lose my appetite. Shen Luoan acted as if he didn't hear her. He grabbed her bag with one hand and grabbed her wrist with the other. He said, Even if you lose your appetite, you can eat it. I'm already out. I have something to say to you. If you have something to say it now. Shen Luoan directly pulled her forward. The old people in the park looked at them and thought that it was a young couple quarreling. They didn't care and turned to continue. Shen Manting's eyes were red and she roared, Shen Luoan. What do you want to eat? No. How about roast duck? No. Let go of me. How about Cantonese cuisine? Hunan cuisine? Sichuan cuisine? Shen Manting tried to pull her hand back, but it didn't budge. She panted and her breathing became heavy. I said I don't want to eat with you. Shen Luoan's face finally darkened. He tightened his grip on her wrist and said in a low voice, Then who do you want to eat with? You dressed up like this. You've seduced me in the past. Are you ready to resume your old career? Why are you always so full of yourself? I'm a woman. Shen Manting couldn't take it anymore and yelled. She choked with sobs. As a woman, can't I dress up a little? This is the first time I've put on makeup and put on a dress in a long time. I just wanted to see my son. I didn't expect you to lie to me. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but her voice was still firm, and she did not let herself cry out loud. After a while, Shen Manting said in a clear voice, "Moreover, even if I do sell it, what does it have to do with you?" Shen Luoan looked at her for a while, his expression unreadable. After a long time he said, "I want to take care of your business." Shen Manting's face suddenly turned pale. She struggled for a moment, but Shen Luoan quickly changed the topic. "It's good that you're not going to date another man. I originally planned to let you see the child, but if my son's mother is such a piece of trash, then there's no need to see her." Shen Manting grasped the main point and looked at him with hope. "No, I just want to dress up and leave a better impression on my son." "Really?" Chapter 1998. Shen Luoan looked at her and pulled her. Shen Manting didn't move. She took a step forward after being pulled by him. Shen Luoan turned around and strode forward, pulling her with him. Shen Manting didn't make a sound and followed him silently. They arrived at a restaurant. Shen Manting used to come here often and especially liked the food here. It wasn't a fancy restaurant, but Shen Manting hadn't eaten in such an occasion for a long time. She followed Shen Luoan and sat down. The waiter quickly brought the menu and waited for them to order. Shen Luoan ordered a lot of dishes in one breath. She didn't know whether it was a coincidence or not, but she found that she liked many of them. Shen Luoan didn't like spicy food, but she liked it very much. At least half of the dishes he ordered were spicy. Her heart fluttered slightly, and a strange feeling surrounded her. She lowered her head and didn't say anything. She had nothing to add. She looked at him and said, "I'm going to the bathroom." "Okay." Shen Luoan took a sip of tea. "I'll take you to see our son after dinner." Shen Manting's posture stiffened slightly, and she quickly left. When she walked to the bathroom, she realized that he wasn't afraid that she would run away. Was he? So when she stood up, she deliberately mentioned their son. She had to admit that this was a very effective method. Not to mention that Shen Manting didn't have any intention of running away. Even if she did, she might give up her original plan because of his words. Shen Luoan knew her too well. She went to the bathroom and washed her hands carefully before returning to the dining table. Shen Luoan was on the phone. He looked calm and emotionless. "Got it. I'm eating. We'll talk when we get back," Shen Luoan said lightly. Then, as if he had thought of something, he said, "By the way, Manting will go back with us later. You should get ready." Shen Manting was shocked and looked at him. On the other end of the phone, Shen Luoan said incredulously, "What?" "She's going to see the baby, and then she'll leave." As he spoke, Shen Luoan looked at her as if asking, "Right?" Shen Manting smiled awkwardly and nodded before sitting down. The dishes were quickly served, and Shen Luoan hung up the phone. No one spoke first. They ate quietly from the beginning to the end. Shen Manting, on the other hand, felt at ease. She didn't stand on ceremony and ate a lot. Shen Luoan paid the bill and quickly led her home. Looking at the familiar villa, Shen Manting found it difficult to move forward. Although this was not the place where she grew up, she had lived here for several years. In those years, there were laughter and pain. Except for Shen Luoan, the people inside were all very nice to her. Shen Manting always felt that she owed him. Now that he had set foot on this piece of land again, he felt very complicated. Shen Luoan had already pressed the doorbell. He looked back at Shen Manting, who was a few meters away, and said coldly, "Why aren't you coming over? You want me to invite you?" Shen Manting moved her lips as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She could only give up. He walked forward, and soon the door opened. When Nanny he saw Shen Luoan, she said, "You're finally back, baby." But before he could finish his sentence, he caught a glimpse of another figure behind Shen Luoan. Chapter 1999. Shen Manting smiled awkwardly and said, Nanny he. It was a familiar voice. Nanny he looked at Shen Manting for a while and said, Miss, come in. Miss. These two words were really ironic. Shen Manting didn't know how she felt at the moment. She pursed her lips and followed Shen Luo and inside. Aunt Zhang was holding the baby and coaxing him. She was surprised to see Nanny he come in with a strange woman behind the young master. She asked casually, Who is this? The baby's mother. Shen Luoan's voice was low and unfriendly. Nanny Zhang's eyelids twitched and she couldn't help but look at Shen Manting. Didn't they say that the baby's mother was dead? How did such a big living person die just like that? But she didn't dare to ask and could only nod. Shen Luo stepped forward and took the baby. The baby had obviously been crying. His big black eyes were wet and his long eyelashes were stuck in his eyes. Shen Luo saw him and reached out to pull him out. Shen Manting couldn't help but step forward and say, He's so big. That's right, Shen Luo replied. He glanced at her indifferently. If you're any more heartless, he'll grow bigger by the time you come again. His voice was calm, but it made Shen Manting's face burn. Nanny he and the other servant were looking at her. This man didn't give her any face at all. Shen Manting silently carried the baby over. Her cheeks were a little red. She looked down and saw the baby's white and tender face. He was growing well. He was at least 2 or 3 times heavier than he was 2 months ago. He didn't look like a 3-month-old baby. She would believe it even if someone told her that he was 4 or 5 months old. She caressed the baby's little face lovingly, and the corners of her lips curled into a smile. Sit down. Don't you feel tired standing? Shen Luo sat down on the sofa and said, Aunt Zhang, bring a bottle of milk. Yes. Aunt Zhang answered and hurriedly went to bring Nanny he with her. What's going on? Aunt Zhang asked. Nanny he glanced at him and said in a low voice, Just do what you need to do. It's none of our business to ask about the boss's business. Anyway, that woman is the baby's mother. Biological. You can adopt him? Then why did eldest young master say that she died? This person is still alive and well. She looks quite strong and very good-looking. Nanny he glanced at the living room and said, Sigh, I don't know how to put it. Anyway, it's quite complicated. Make your milk. I'll go make some tea. Aunt Zhang saw that she was so stubborn that she couldn't open her mouth no matter how hard she tried. Unwilling to give up, she turned her head and muttered, If you ask me, it must be a couple quarreling. Young master is also like that. Who can stand it? Do what you need to do. Nanny he did not know what to do with her. She made some tea and went out. Shen Luo and Shen Manting sat on the sofa, facing each other. Shen Manting held the baby in her arms and smiled. The baby seemed to recognize her. He was grinning, revealing his pink and tender gums. His little mouth was full of saliva and almost dripped out. When Nanny he saw this, she muttered to herself, She's indeed a biological mother. She doesn't even smile so happily when they've been hugging and coaxing her for a long time. Chapter 2000. Thank you, Shen Manting said. Nanny he smiled, then glanced at them, put down the teacup, and left. Aunt Zhang brought the milk powder over and said, Young master, it's ready. Give it to her. Shen Luo pointed at Shen Manting. Shen Manting glanced at it and reached out to take it. She tested the temperature and frowned, saying, It's so hot. Aunt Zhang was a little dissatisfied when she heard that. But she still said, I was thinking that he might not be hungry so soon. He might drink it after a while, so I heated it up a little. Shen Manting didn't say anything and put the bottle on the coffee table in front of her. Aunt Zhang glanced at her and saw that she didn't say anything, so she turned and left. But after a while, the baby stretched out his hands and looked like he was about to cry. Shen Manting saw that the baby must be hungry. She touched the bottle and found that the temperature was still a little high. She tested it and frowned, saying, Lower the temperature. It's too hot. How can the baby eat it? Aunt Zhang came over and said, Then I'll add some cold water. What? Shen Manting thought she heard wrong. What did you say? Aunt Zhang was confused. She didn't think there was anything wrong and said, Cold water. Where did you hire this aunt? Is she a child caretaker? How dare you add cold water to the baby's milk? Shen Manting laughed as if she had heard a joke. Hold it. I'll do it. Aunt Zhang was a little angry and said, "What's wrong with adding cold water? He's still drinking it. The baby is still so young. What if he gets sick from adding cold water to his milk? How can you take responsibility?" Shen Manting handed the baby to Shen Luoan and said angrily, "He's not your child. How can you be so careless?" Aunt Zhang was also unconvinced and shouted, "Do you really have to be like this? Do you really think you're a mistress?" The baby seemed to be frightened and began to cry. Shen Manting didn't expect to be criticized like this. She looked at Nanny He, who had heard the noise and rushed over. She asked, "Nanny He, who is she?" Nanny He was still working and wiped her apron twice. She smiled awkwardly and said, "A new aunt. She's been here for less than half a month. Go back. There's no need to come back." Shen Luoan stood up with the baby in his arms. His expression was grim. "You don't have any common sense at all. How can you take care of a child like this?" Auntie Zhang was flustered and exasperated. "Fine, I won't do it. My 3 children were raised like this. Why are rich people so squeamish?" "Nanny He," Shen Luan called out. Nanny He quickly nodded and pulled Aunt Zhang along. "Let's go. Who would add raw water to such a young child's milk?" "Who said I'm adding raw water? I'm talking about cold boiled water." Aunt Zhang finally understood. She turned around and said, "Young master, I'm talking about cold boiled water. You can drink it after mixing it evenly." Shen Manting had already entered the kitchen with the milk bottle. Shen Luoan glanced at her and said, "You don't have to come again. Let's go." Nanny He tugged at her. "What kind of nanny has such a bad temper? Just based on what you said just now, you can't stay." Aunt Zhang felt wronged. "I didn't say anything. Young mistress," Nanny He said in a low voice. "Who are you to decide who will be the young mistress?" Aunt Zhang was speechless for a moment. Indeed, what she said was a little inappropriate. Chapter 2001. Aunt Zhang was puzzled. She looked at Shen Luoan but didn't say anything. She turned around and left. Shen Luoan held the baby in his arms. The baby's face was red from crying. He waved his hands, and his voice sounded childish and heart-wrenching. Shen Manting soaked the bottle in cold water and waited for it to cool down before she came out. She walked quickly and her heart was in her throat. She rushed forward and stuffed the bottle into the baby's mouth. As soon as the baby's mouth was blocked, he stopped crying. She hugged the milk bottle and sucked hard, drinking a little too quickly. Shen Manting looked at the baby and her face softened. She looked up at Shen Luoan and asked, "Do you want a hug?" Shen Luoan handed it over. Shen Manting took it and held the bottle in her hand. Her heart softened. "Where do you live now?" Shen Luoan looked at the baby and asked abruptly. Shen Manting looked up and found that he wasn't looking at her. She asked weakly, "You're asking me? Who else would I ask if not you?" Shen Luoan looked away and stood up. "Tongzhou. So far away?" Shen Luoan looked at her and then at the baby. "You made me fire the nanny I hired to take care of the baby. What should I do now? You let this kind of nanny take care of the baby?" Shen Manting found it ridiculous. "Are you crazy? I had no choice. It's not long after the new year. Few nannies of her age are willing to be nannies. It's not suitable to find a young one." Shen Luoan put his hands in his pockets. "Now that the nanny is gone, you have to compensate me." Shen Manting was annoyed and retorted, "How can you be so unreasonable? You were the one who fired him, not me. I wouldn't have fired her if you hadn't pointed out her small problem." "You call this a small problem?" Shen Manting was angry. "Isn't the baby your own? She wanted to add cold water to your son's milk. What if the baby got a stomach ache? Is this a small problem?" Shen Luoan glanced at her. "I don't know if she used to do this, but the baby has always been fine." Shen Manting was exasperated. "Are you my real father? It was a mistake for me to give the baby to you." His voice was a little loud, and the baby seemed to be frightened as it whimpered. Shen Manting looked down and saw that the baby's eyebrows were red and wrinkled. He looked like he was about to cry. She quickly patted his little body and softly said, "Don't cry, don't cry. Mommy was wrong. The baby reached out and carelessly touched her cheek. Shen Manting's heart warmed, but she didn't forget to glare at him. Aunt Zhang has left. There's no one at home to take care of the child. You should take care of him. Shen Luoan looked at her. You're his biological mother. You'll definitely be better at taking care of him than anyone else. Shen Manting was stunned. She couldn't figure out what he was trying to do. When she didn't respond, he continued, Think about it. No. Shen Manting subconsciously refused. But looking at the baby in her arms, she couldn't say anything else. Where's Mother He? Where is Auntie Wu? Auntie Wu went back to her hometown before the Lunar New Year. She won't be coming anymore. Nanny He has to do the housework. She has to handle everything in the house. That's why I hired an auntie. I didn't expect her to have such a bad temper. Shen Manting looked at the infant. Chapter 2002. This way, it will show that it has been updated, but in fact, it will replace the previous chapters. You can click on the chapters that you have already read, and there will be no charge. Everyone! This announcement has already been made once. I don't know why you didn't see it, but I will make it again here. Chapter 2003. The baby's pink lips were still dripping with milk. It looked soft and adorable, and Shen Manting's heart was about to melt. Fortunately, she was fired. Otherwise, the baby wouldn't even know it when he was abused. Shen Luoan's expression was calm as he sat down. If you don't want to, I'll hire another nanny, but I don't know if she'll treat the baby like Aunt Zhang. Wasn't this clear enough? He wanted Shen Manting to stay, but why didn't he say it out loud? Nanny He was anxious when she heard this. But she was too embarrassed to interrupt the couple's conversation. Shen Manting held the baby in her arms and fell silent. Stay and take good care of the baby. Yes, how could a nanny take care of the baby be better than a biological mother? Shen Manting was a little tempted. The baby squinted and was a little drowsy. His face was a little pink, and his skin was delicate. What if he was abused by another nanny? It won't happen, Shen Manting suddenly said in a firm voice. She didn't know if she was trying to convince Shen Luoan or herself. With Nanny He here, how could there be a nanny who would abuse the baby? It won't happen. Besides, your mother doesn't go to the hospital often. She'll help take care of the baby, right? The whole family was here, and it was impossible for all of them to go out, right? Isn't Gilia married? You can ask his wife to help. That's Gilia's wife, not mine. Why should she help me take care of the baby? Shen Luoan frowned and said, Since you're so unwilling, forget it. You can go back. Shen Luoan stood up as he spoke and reached out to take the baby away. Shen Manting resisted. She held the baby in her arms and took a step back, unwilling to let go. Shen Luoan's expression darkened, and he asked, What do you mean? Shen Manting said sheepishly, The baby is almost asleep. Wait a moment. What are you waiting for? Don't think that you can pretend that you love the baby just because you're holding him. Shen Luoan's expression was calm, but his tone was sarcastic. It's a fact that you don't want him. Do you think you can pretend that you didn't do anything wrong by pretending? As he spoke, he pushed her hand away and took the baby in his arms. The baby was about to fall asleep, but was woken up by Shen Luoan's hug. She pouted and blushed, ready to cry. Shen Manting felt a pang in her heart as she watched. But soon, he turned around and quickly said, I'm sorry, thank you for letting me see him. After that, he picked up his bag from the sofa and walked out quickly. Nanny He felt a pang in her heart when she saw Shen Manting's expression. After a while, she turned to look at Shen Luoan and said, How can you say that? It's not easy for Miss to come back. What will happen if you let her hold the baby more? Shen Luoan's face remained expressionless when he heard this. He said, Some people have to be kept in suspense. When she's done humiliating herself, she'll naturally change her mind. Then, she carried the baby back to the room. Nanny He stomped her feet angrily and heartbrokenly. What a jerk! Who would want to stay after saying that? Fortunately, it wasn't her son, otherwise, she would have strangled him to death. Chapter 2004. When Shen Manting came out of the Shen family, she couldn't hold back her tears. Every word that Shen Luo and had said seemed to stab into her heart. Yes, she was the one who didn't want the child. In order to leave Shen Luo, she even gave up the child. It was also proved that Shen Luo took good care of the child. He was fair and chubby. If she had raised him by her side, he wouldn't have become like this. She had to survive and she had to live. Therefore she had to work, she had to earn money, and she had to support herself first. When Shen Luo asked her to stay and take care of the baby, Shen Manting was tempted. But it seemed that she was used to it, and she immediately refused. In the past, she would have convinced herself that she was afraid of Shen Luo's violence. But after spending time with Shen Luo during the confinement period, and after seeing him later, Shen Manting's mood had obviously eased a lot. When she saw Shen Luo, it was no longer because she was afraid. It was because Shen Manting couldn't tell why. It seemed that avoiding Shen Luo and refusing him had become a habit. Realizing this, Shen Manting suddenly laughed at herself. What a terrible habit. It was so terrible that she even lost the child. When she returned to the small rented house in Tongzhou, the room was very dark. Shen Manting didn't turn on the light. Instead, she walked to the mirror and looked at herself in the bright and beautiful mirror. Suddenly, Shen Manting was not used to it. She looked so beautiful. She was so beautiful that she didn't look like Shen Manting. Ding dong. It was a WeChat notification. She looked down and took out her phone from her bag. It was from Xueqi, who had recruited her last time. Xueqi, hello, have you arrived in the capital? Mopey. Yes, I'm in Tongzhou. Xueqi, okay, then please come to XX District XX Road North number 89 for an interview tomorrow morning. Mopey heart. Okay. Yi Qianqian saw Shen Jilia's message and was very nervous. She said, is it really okay for us to lie to people like this? I think Shen Manting is very pitiful. What if she finds out that it's all a scam? Will she go crazy? Shen Jilia stuffed the phone back to her and said carelessly, maybe, but I really asked her to come for an interview. Bah, you said it's a job in the book marketing department. What are you talking about? Besides, it's not just the job that's different. The salary and benefits are different too. If she finds out that we're the ones who lied to her, won't she be even angrier? Don't worry. I've already taken care of the salary. It's just that the job is a little tough. I'm not sure if Sister Manting can handle it. How hard? I leave early and return late. How early and how late? If she lives in Tongzhou, she might have to leave an hour and a half earlier to catch the subway to get here. F***ck me. Are you crazy? Yi Qianqian found it hard to believe. Didn't you say that there would be a staff dormitory? Didn't we agree on that before? Yeah, so I rented a dormitory for Yang Ye's female employees. They've probably moved in already. That's good. Yi Qianqian breathed a sigh of relief. The interview went very smoothly. Although Shen Manting had some doubts about the position, the salary and benefits were similar to what was stated in the WeChat message, so she didn't ask any more questions. After moving from Tongzhou, Shen Manting only had a large backpack with her. The probation period was only 3 days. During those 3 days, Shen Manting ran up and down. She was really exhausted, but she felt a sense of fulfillment. However, on the 4th day, when she officially started work, she received bad news. Chapter 2005. Shen Manting clocked in at the office, changed into her work uniform, and was about to start work when she received a call. There was no name on the number, but it was very familiar. It was Shen Luo. Shen Manting hung up the phone and started to prepare her tools. He had all the banknotes and a series of preparations to make. About 3 minutes after he finished, his phone rang again. However, it wasn't Shen Luo this time. It was a landline number. Territory: Imperial Capital. It was not the Shen family's landline number. Shen Manting pondered for a moment before answering the call. Hello. It was the voice of a middle-aged woman. It sounded a little noisy. Hello, this is Imperial Capital Renxin Hospital. I'm the head nurse of the pediatrics department. Shen Yueshao has a high fever that hasn't subsided. It's been half a day, and his fever has reached 39 degrees Celsius. Shen Yueshao? What? Shen Manting couldn't react for a moment. After a while, she suddenly remembered that wasn't the baby's name. Hurry up and come back to take care of the child. Don't quarrel with the child's father. The child has a high fever. The head nurse's voice was full of reproach and impatience. Call your man. No one can take care of him better than his own mother. Shen Manting's mind was buzzing, and the head nurse hung up the phone. She hurriedly called Shen Luo-an, and the call was quickly picked up. The voice sounded a little hoarse. Hello. Shen Luo-an. I heard that the child is sick? Shen Manting's voice was filled with panic. As she spoke, she had already walked to her wardrobe. The other side responded in a low voice. When Shen Manting heard this, she became even angrier and yelled, Is this how you take care of the child? You're such a good father to have a fever like that. He didn't bother to hide his voice at all. His colleagues looked over. What are you doing? At least I can take care of the child. Where have you been? Shen Luo-an retorted sarcastically. The baby is on an 4 drip now. He's had a fever since last night. If the fever continues, he'll become retarded. Shen Manting's heart was pounding, and her mind was in a mess. He hung up the phone and hurriedly took out his clothes to change before he went to the leader to ask for leave. Fortunately, the leader was still reasonable. When they heard that the child was sick, they didn't say anything and just let him go. This place was a little far from Benevolent Heart Hospital, and it was rush hour. This was the bad thing about the imperial capital. No matter what mode of transportation, there would always be terrible traffic jams. There was a traffic jam on the highway and a traffic jam on the subway. Fortunately, Shen Manting squeezed through the crowd and waited for the subway 3 times before she finally got on the train. There were fewer people at the Ranxin subway station. Shen Manting walked quickly and soon left the road. Shen Manting was panting heavily when she found the place Shen Luo-an had mentioned. The child was asleep and his body was red from the fever. Shen Manting reached out and touched it. It was shockingly hot. Heavens! Tears welled up in Shen Manting's eyes. Why did he suddenly have such a high fever? What kind of nanny did you hire for him? Shen Luo-an was already in a terrible fix. When he heard this, he closed his eyes and scratched his head. Shen Manting was exasperated. She kicked him and said, Are you mute? Say something. I've already said that a nanny can't take care of him as well as a real mother. Half of the credit goes to you for the baby's current state. Shen Luo-an frowned impatiently. How dare you blame me? Chapter 2006. Her voice was choked with sobs, but she didn't forget to glare at Shen Luo-an as she spoke. Shen Luo-an looked at her tears and sighed heavily. He said helplessly, Why are you crying? You're cooling down now. Shen Manting went up to take a look. There was a baby patch on the baby's forehead, and he was still receiving an 4 drip. Shen Manting's heart ached when her little feet were tied up. Can you lower his temperature? She looked at Shen Luo-an with a hopeful expression. No, the temperature is too high. Shen Luo-an sighed. I didn't go home the day before yesterday. I left the baby with Nanny He. Would Nanny He be so careless with her children? Shen Manting frowned and wiped away her tears. And where did you go? Why didn't you come home? Shen Luo-an furrowed his brows and looked at Shen Manting. He seemed to have calmed down a little and said, Shen Manting, I have a job too. I have things to do too. You said that the nanny is unreliable, so I didn't hire a nanny. I left the baby with Nanny He. Mom was at home the day before yesterday, but she went out. Shen Manting stopped talking. She wanted to hold the infant, but she was afraid that she might accidentally touch him and make him uncomfortable. The nurse walked in and saw Shen Manting. She said, You must be the baby's mother. Come, keep an eye on him. When he wakes up later, remember to feed him some medicine to reduce his fever. The nurse was holding a small packet of granules in her hand. It was the first time Shen Manting had seen such a thing. She nodded repeatedly. Give him the medicine after he drinks the milk. It will take a while. All right. Shen Manting turned to look at Shen Luo-an. Did you bring milk powder? Yes. Shen Luo-an pointed to another place. There was not only milk powder, but also paper diapers and a kettle for boiling water. There was also a large bottle of mineral water next to it. It was obvious that it was brought from home. It was obvious that the milk powder had already been washed once. Shen Manting went over to boil the water and left it there for a long time before the milk was added. The baby woke up with a whimper. Shen Luo and looked at the 4 drip that was about to run out. As she coaxed the child, she pressed the call button. The nurse pulled out the needle and frowned. It's still hot. As parents you have to pay more attention. It's bad for such a young child to catch a cold. Shen Manting and Shen Luo and remained silent. Shen Luo and picked up the baby and sat on the bed. Shen Manting held the bottle and said, "The temperature is fine. Let the baby drink it." However, when she stuffed the pacifier into the baby's mouth, the baby refused to drink. She twisted her head, her face flushed red, and she didn't even open her eyes. Shen Manting's heart ached even more. She reached out and took it. Shen Luo stood up and said, "The baby hasn't had milk for a long time. He used to drink once every hour or so. Now, it's been 3 hours. Ah!" Shen Manting became even more anxious when she heard that. "What should we do?" "Force it down." Shen Luoan looked at him. He might feel better after taking some medicine. Shen Manting frowned, but she still adopted Shen Luoan's method. The 2 of them tossed and turned for a while. Although the baby didn't eat much, he still ate. Shen Luoan fed the baby some medicine. After crying for a while, the baby fell asleep. Shen Manting couldn't stop hugging him. Her heart ached and she blamed herself. From time to time, Shen Luoan would also reach out to touch it. Fortunately, his fever had finally subsided. Shen Luoan used an ear thermometer on the baby. The temperature was only 37.5 degrees. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. When Shen Manting saw that, she was finally relieved. Chapter 2007. Whatever. Shen Luoan glanced at her. "It's not for sale outside. You know my taste. Just buy whatever you like." "How about noodles?" Shen Luoan asked casually. "I want to eat." "Didn't you say anything?" Shen Manting glared at him and said, "Whatever you want then." Shen Luoan, who had been suppressing his emotions for a long time, suddenly felt a lot better. He quickly walked out, and when he came back, he was already carrying 2 bags. However, there were 2 more people in the room. Shen Jilie and Yi Qianqian were inside. Yi Qianqian was sitting on the bed, while Shen Jilie was fussing about changing diapers. When Shen Jishue saw Shen Luoan, he said, "Hey, you bought so many things. Did you know we were coming?" When Yi Qianqian saw that, she nudged Shen Jilie and said, "Since Big Brother is back, let's go. The baby's fever has subsided. We have to tell Mommy the good news." "What's the hurry?" Shen Jilie pulled a diaper over. "Big Brother is finally back. Let's sit down and have a chat." "What are you talking about?" Yi Qianqian glared at him. "Are you trying to starve me to death? Let's go eat first." His eyes were filled with warning. Shen Jilie was at a loss for words. He said, "All right, my wife has the final say. Come on, let's go eat." The young couple finally left. As soon as Yi Qianqian stepped out of the room, she smacked Shen Jilie and said, "Are you silly? Big brother and sister-in-law have finally gotten together. Why don't you just leave them alone and eat together? Who knows, they might even rekindle their old feelings and rekindle their love." When Shen Jilie heard that, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. "What did you say? Love what fire? Have they ever been together?" "Go away, what do you know?" Yi Qianqian took his hand and analyzed. If a woman doesn't love that man, it's impossible for her to give birth to his child. Look, she's so nervous about the child. This shows that the child is very important to her. That's why she's so concerned about it. Besides, if she really hated Big Brother, she wouldn't have come back to the capital. "That's right. Yeah." Shen Jilie's eyes turned into crescents. "Yes, my wife is right." Yi Qianqian glared at him. "You don't believe me?" "Yes." "Then why are you laughing?" "I laughed. I didn't expect you to be so smart." Yi Qianqian was annoyed and elbowed him. "Go to hell. You're laughing at me. Shen Jielia chuckled as he blocked the attack and quickly apologized. In the ward, Shin Luoan spread out the lunchboxes he had just bought and asked casually, "What did they say to you?" "No, I just asked about the baby." Shen Luoan opened the lunchbox and put down the small table on the bed. "Let's eat." "The baby has never been sick before?" "No." Shen Luoan didn't even raise his head. "I've been taking care of it all by myself. I rarely touch it. A few days ago, I couldn't leave the laboratory. So weak." Shen Manting felt that it was too much of a coincidence. She looked at the baby in her arms and felt his body temperature. She was still in shock. "Shen Luoan, are you busy in the lab?" "I'm busy." Shen Luoan didn't even raise his head. "I've already rested for too long this year. I'm especially busy at this time of the year. You know that." She knew, how could she not know? Chapter 2008. Shen Luo and had already set up the lunchbox. When he heard this, he paused and looked up at her. Shen Manting looked conflicted and said, "The baby is still young. I want to take care of him for a while and let him live with me for a while. Is that okay?" She was asking for his opinion. Shen Luoan had already guessed it in his heart. With a self-deprecating smile, Shen Luoan sat down and handed her a bowl of rice. "Of course. Why not?" Shen Manting's eyes lit up and she asked, "Really?" "Yes, but he must be taken care of at home. The child can't go anywhere." Shen Luoan looked at her. "When I first brought him from Jiangsu, he was not acclimatized. I won't take him far away. I'll stay in the capital." Shen Manting looked at him. "I have a job in the capital. I can afford to raise him." It was a monthly salary of 5,000 yuan, and accommodation was included. If she ate sparingly, it would be enough to raise the child. Shen Luoan had a mocking smile on his face. "What kind of job? How can you take care of the child at the same time?" His smile was a little malicious. Shen Manting saw it and was angry. She said angrily, "What do you mean?" "What do I mean? Why are you so sensitive?" Shen Luoan looked away and said. Shen Manting was even more angry. "Can't you speak properly?" "Didn't I speak properly?" Shen Luoan glanced at her. "I didn't yell at you or scold you. Why can't you speak properly?" Shen Manting was speechless for a moment. Looking at him eating slowly, her stomach was also growling. "Eat. Don't say that I mistreated you." Shen Luoan put a pair of chopsticks on the lunchbox. "Let's talk after eating." Shen Manting felt very uncomfortable. Looking at Shen Luoan's calm appearance, she felt even more angry. She carefully put the baby down, wiped her hands, removed the chopsticks, and began to eat happily. No matter what, she couldn't make things difficult for herself. After eating, Shen Manting consciously cleaned up and threw the food into the trash can. Shen Luoan wiped the corner of his mouth and said slowly, "Move in. Aunt Zhang just left, so there's a nanny room." "You want me to be a nanny?" Shen Manting couldn't believe it. She was the baby's biological mother. Could it be that she needed to be paid to be a nanny to take care of her own child? How ironic. "What else do you want to be?" Shen Luoan looked at her and sneered. "Young madam? Or a wet nurse?" Shen Manting stopped talking and felt an inexplicable pain in her heart. He felt terrible. It was unbearable. "You've been trying to distance yourself from me and the baby. Wouldn't it be too unfair for you to marry me?" Shen Luoan stood up and wiped his hands with a wet tissue. "So I have no choice but to make you a nanny. I'm giving you a chance. You can take care of the baby, and I can rest assured. I won't treat you shabbily in terms of salary." He casually tossed the wet tissue away, and with an unknown expression he said softly, "You know, I've always been very generous to you." He didn't say anything harsh, but every word seemed to stab at her heart. Shen Manting felt a lump in her throat and tears welled up in her eyes. She swallowed hard and leaned over to check on the baby's tiny body. It was much better than before. However, the scorching heat from before was still lingering in his hand. Chapter 2009. "Okay." Shen Manting's voice was soft. Shen Luoan looked at her and seemed a little surprised. I promise you. Shen Manting looked at the baby and her voice was so soft that no one knew where it came from. As soon as she agreed, Shen Manting went to resign. She apologized to her supervisor and boss and went to the Shen family that day. Shen Manting didn't have much luggage. She only had a small suitcase and a small backpack with her toiletries and other things that she couldn't bear to throw away. Shen Manting was a little hesitant when she arrived. But after thinking about it, she still rang the doorbell. Nanny He quickly opened the door and saw Shen Manting carrying the luggage. She was stunned and said, Miss? Shen Manting smiled awkwardly. Nanny He immediately reacted and said, Come in quickly. Here, give it to me. She reached out to take the suitcase from Shen Manting. Shen Manting quickly said, No, I can do it myself. Nanny He, where is the room of the aunt who left last time? I'll move in. Ha! Nanny He was stunned again. That's the nanny's room. Yes, it's the nanny's room. Shen Manting's face was a little hot and she said, From now on, I'll be the nanny of the family. Nanny He felt ridiculous and laughed. But when she looked at Shen Manting, she realized that she didn't seem to be joking. For a moment, the two of them froze. Their expressions were indescribably awkward. Just then, the door of the room opened and the baby's voice was heard. Shen Luoan walked out with the baby in his arms and glanced at it. He said, Nanny He, take her to Aunt Zhang's room and help her tidy up. From now on, she'll come to our house to take care of the baby. When Nanny He heard Shen Luoan's words, she still couldn't believe it and said, Young master, do you know what you're talking about? She's Miss Manting. Go. Shen Luoan glanced at it and then his eyes fell on Shen Manting. I'm going out later. I need to go to the laboratory. You take care of the baby. When Shen Manting heard that, she was angry and said, Do you have any conscience? The baby is so feverish and you're still in the mood to work. Shen Luoan sneered and said, Since you're here to be a nanny, you should act like one. What kind of standpoint are you using to talk to me? Have you forgotten how I fired Aunt Zhang? Shen Manting paused for a moment, then gritted her teeth and said, I'm the mother of the child. If the child's mother wasn't here, I wouldn't have been able to leave. Shen Luoan glanced at her and then turned around. Shen Manting was stunned. Hurry up, I'm in a hurry, Shen Luoan urged. Shen Manting pulled her luggage into the room. However, the moment she entered, she felt that it was a little unbearable. This is the nanny's room? The room was small and dark. Next to the washing machine, behind the balcony. The rectangular room looked like a corridor, but both sides were blocked, so it looked like a small room. There was only one bed at one end. The bed was 1.2 meters long, and there was a bedside table. At the other end was a bathroom. It was very small. There was a toilet and a shower, but it didn't even have a sink. Was this really livable? Chapter 2010. Nanny He saw her expression and said, This is the smallest nanny's room. It's a small cubicle. Why don't you stay in my room when I'm free? Shen Manting shook her head and said, That's it. I'll be a nanny in the future. There's no difference in treatment. She said, Miss, young master is probably just joking with you. It's not like you don't know him. He has a nasty mouth, but he might not be thinking the same way. You should go and apologize to him. You can still take care of the baby. You don't have to stay here anymore. Then where should I live? Shen Manting laughed self-deprecatingly. I'm not the daughter here, nor am I Shen Luoan's sister. It's most suitable for me to live here. As she spoke, she put down her suitcase and said, I'll go take the baby first. I'll clean up later. Nanny He, you go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Shen Manting placed her handbag on the bed and walked out of the room. Shen Luoan had coaxed the baby to sleep. He put him in the crib. When he saw her come in, he said, If anything happens to the baby later, call me immediately. Nonsense. Shen Manting frowned. He'll be fine. Shen Luoan propped himself up and took off his clothes. Shen Manting was shocked and asked, What are you doing? Shen Luoan paused and glanced at her. With a natural expression he said, I'm changing. He casually threw the clothes into the basket and slowly opened the wardrobe. He took out a piece of clothing and slowly put it on before turning to leave. Shen Manting felt a little uncomfortable. After he left, she dared to turn around and look. Shen Luoen's room was very big. It was also a master bedroom. There was a large cloakroom and a 2-meter bed. The bathroom in the suite was fully equipped. It was divided into a toilet, a shower, and a bathtub. It was huge. This room alone was bigger than all the houses she had lived in for more than a year. However, when she saw the bed, Shen Manting still couldn't calm down and felt a little scared. Back then, Shen Luoen had pressed her on this bed and forced her to do all the things she didn't want. She had been humiliated in all kinds of positions, and he had treated her as a lowly prostitute. Shen Manting's heart tightened, and she suddenly felt that she was extremely cheap. She looked at the baby who was sleeping peacefully in the crib and felt her heart ache. So be it. It seemed that it was too late to turn back now. He walked out and walked to his old room. The room was still empty and tidied up very cleanly. From the looks of it, it should have been converted into a guest room. There were quite a number of rooms in the villa. The door to Shen Jilia's room was tightly shut, as was the door to the room next to it. Nanny he came forward and noticed her gaze. She said, "These 2 rooms are second young master's. The room he used to live in was too small. Now that he's married, he's using a bigger room. The couple is buying an apartment. The renovations are already done. They'll probably move out at the end of the year." Shen Manting nodded and sighed. Jilia has grown up. Yes. Nanny he smiled. Everyone in the family is getting happier and happier. All that's left is young master. Shen Manting fell silent and looked at her. Chapter 2011. Nanny he sighed faintly and said, "During that period of time, eldest young master was really in a bad state. He rarely went to work and rarely spoke. Sometimes, he didn't even eat and would sit in his room for most of the day." Shen Manting stopped talking and turned to look at the baby. The baby was sleeping soundly. Although his facial features were still immature, his nose and mouth were identical to Shen Luoan's. "Miss, I'll leave first. Sir and Madam will be back soon," Nanny he said. Shen Manting nodded and began to tidy up the baby's belongings. Sure enough, Shen Longyue and Mrs. Shen returned after a while. As soon as she returned, she asked Nanny he about the child's whereabouts. Mrs. Shen walked into Shen Luoan's room with a distressed expression. When she saw Shen Manting, she was slightly stunned. Shen Manting smiled awkwardly and said, "Hello, Mrs. Shen. Long time no see." Only then did Madame Shen regain her senses. She looked at her and turned her head in a daze, shouting, "Long Yu! Manting is back." Shen Longyue had just put down his briefcase when he heard this. He immediately walked up to her and was slightly surprised to see her. Then, a look of joy appeared on his calm face as he asked, "Manting?" Shen Manting nodded awkwardly and smiled. "Sir." The smile on Shen Longyue's face froze when he heard this obviously distant form of address. He turned to look at Mrs. Shen and saw that she looked sad. Mrs. Shen stepped forward and looked at Shen Manting. She said, "Look at you. You've lost so much weight. Besides, we're your parents. Can you address us as you used to?" Shen Manting pursed her lips and remained silent. Shen Longyue sighed and walked to the baby's crib. He reached out to touch the baby's body and said, "It's good that the fever has subsided." Shen Manting looked at them and said, "Go and rest. Leave this to me. From now on, I'll be the baby's nanny." Shen Longyue was shocked. "What did you say? How can you be a nanny?" Mrs. Shen was delighted and said, "Do you mean that you'll take care of the baby and not leave?" In fact, Shen Manting hadn't thought about it yet. When he heard this, he neither nodded nor shook his head. "I'll take care of the baby." As for how long, she didn't know. Perhaps half a year, or a few months. After all, she was not a member of the Shen family. She could not take this child with her. She would not take anything else with her. Mrs. Shen's face lit up with joy. She looked at Shen Manting and said, "That's great. I'll ask Nanny he to prepare more dishes. Our family will be happy today." "Sir, madam, there's no need for that." Shen Manting looked at them and said, "Shen Luo and asked me to be a nanny, so I'm a nanny. I'm nothing but this." The nanny's room has already been tidied up. Mrs. Shen's heart ached. She looked at Shen Manting and stomped her feet anxiously. How can you do that? Manting, don't say things like that. Shen Longyue was the same. He frowned and shook his head. You're not allowed to be a nanny. Since you're back, go back to your room. Chapter 2012. Give the child a home? Shen Manting smiled awkwardly and said, Well, since you're back, look after the child. I'll go pack my things first. As she spoke, she pulled her hand out of Shen Luoan's and quickly walked out. Mrs. Shen was a little stunned when she saw this. She turned to look at Shen Longyue and found that he was rebuking her. You're too impatient. Mrs. Shen felt aggrieved. She pursed her lips and said, Isn't that what you mean? That's what I want, but Manting has just come back. It's not too late to express this intention later. Shen Longyue reached out and gently patted his wife on the back. Luo An has done too many ridiculous things in the past. I'm afraid she won't be able to accept him so soon. Let's take it slow. Take it slow. Mrs. Shen felt even more aggrieved. Luo An is already so old, and they even have a child. As she spoke, she lowered her voice and said, And now that she's living in our house, what if someone sees her and thinks she's our daughter? Wouldn't she be fooling around with Luo An? The more she thought about this, the more anxious Mrs. Shen became. She looked at Shen Longyue and said, Honey, I think this matter should be settled as soon as possible. I can take my time, but Luo An is your son and your mother's grandson. It doesn't matter if you're not anxious, but your mother will be. Mrs. Shen's words made sense, and Shen Longyue also thought of this problem. He frowned and said, Since Luo An said to let her come to our house as a nanny first, he must have made arrangements. Whoever started the trouble must end it. Let's wait for Luo An to settle it himself. Mother will definitely be impatient. I'll think about it for Mother. Isn't she coming back in a few days? We'll talk about it then. Although Mrs. Shen was not very satisfied when she heard this, Shen Luo An and Shen Longyue had the same temperament. Since he did this, he must have already planned it out. She hoped that she wouldn't make things worse. The couple discussed it, and Shen Manting had already begun to prepare her small room. Although the room was small, it was still a separate compartment. She put the bed sheets on, turned on the light, and entered a new living environment. During this period of time, she had been to many places. Although it was a little small, the conditions were not bad. The baby seemed to know the time. Shen Manting had just unpacked her luggage when she heard the baby crying. He quickly washed his hands and hurried over. Mrs. Shen was already coaxing the baby in her arms. When she saw Shen Manting approaching, she smiled and said, Manting, can you help change the baby's diaper? He might have pooped. She then looked at the time and said, It's time for the baby to take his medicine. We have to feed him some milk first. Mrs. Shen was even happier. Although Manting was unwilling to marry Luo An, she was, after all, the baby's biological mother. When taking care of the baby, she was more attentive than any other nanny. Take it slow. Longyu was right. This kind of matter could not be rushed. After playing with the child, Nanny he finished preparing the meal. Shen Jielia and his wife didn't come back for dinner, and Shen Luo and couldn't leave the laboratory, so they were the only ones eating. Chapter 2013. She hurriedly finished her meal and hurried into the room. The baby had just taken the medicine and fell asleep again. Shen Manting looked at the baby's sleeping face next to the crib, and the corners of her mouth slightly raised. Shen Manting couldn't get enough of his fair and tender face. From time to time, she would touch his little hands, touch his little face, and even his fetal hair was very cute. She didn't know how long she stayed by his side before sitting down. Being a mother was really a very happy thing. If it weren't for Shen Luoan, perhaps her life would be different now. But it was too late. From the moment she agreed to come back with the old lady, she was destined to be extraordinary in this life. When she looked at the baby, he had already slept for more than an hour. Normally, he should wake up soon. She immediately went to boil water to make the milk powder. Just as the milk powder was ready, the baby woke up with a whimper. Shen Manting looked at it and breathed a sigh of relief. She tested the temperature, and when it was suitable, she put it aside and picked up the baby. She fed the bottle to him, and in a moment, the baby stopped crying. A pair of soft and tender hands held the bottle and sucked. Looking at the baby sucking the milk in big mouthfuls, Shen Manting felt a twinge in her heart. When she just left, her breasts were swollen and painful. Every day, she fantasized about the baby sucking in her arms. She fantasized about this feeling for more than half a month. Later, with the little savings she had left, she traveled while doing odd jobs, and the feeling faded a little. However, in the end, under the solicitation of the personnel department, she couldn't help but join. After that, Shen Manting's heart became more and more guilty. When the baby was full, he opened a pair of round black eyes and looked at Shen Manting. A pair of pink and tender feet looked at Shen Manting and stretched out his little fist. She didn't know what he saw, but he suddenly grinned. His pink and tender gums were exposed, and he was so cute that Shen Manting's heart melted. After playing with the baby for a while and changing the baby's diaper, Shen Manting was very sleepy. She looked at the time, and it was past 9 o'clock in the evening. Time passed unknowingly, and Shen Luo still hadn't returned. After thinking about it, Shen Manting sat on the bed with the baby in her arms. An adult and a child stared at each other. Shen Manting felt like a fool, but she was enjoying it. All of a sudden, the door opened. Shen Manting was startled by the sudden movement. She stood up abruptly. Such an action also startled the baby. He opened his mouth and looked like he was about to cry. When Shen Luo saw Shen Manting acting as if she was about to face a formidable enemy, he felt as if a certain part of his heart had been ruthlessly stabbed. However, his expression was still gloomy as he asked, "How is the baby?" "Very good." Shen Manting tried to calm herself down. She lowered her head and said, "Very good." "Okay." Shen Luo answered and was about to close the door. However, this movement soon stopped. He glanced at Shen Manting and decided not to close the door. "I'll take a shower first," he said. "Oh." Shen Manting couldn't help but feel a little anxious as she held the baby in her arms. It was another chance to be alone, and it was in his room. It was as if he had returned to a year ago, before everything had happened. "Wait," Shen Manting suddenly said. I'll take the baby to the living room first. I'll come out when you're done." Shen Luo felt a stab in his heart, and his lips suddenly tightened. Chapter 2014. The bathroom door was slammed shut with a dull thud. Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat. She walked out with the infant in her arms and sat on the sofa in the living room. Mrs. Shen was wearing pajamas and was drinking water from a glass in her hand. When she saw Shen Manting, she walked over and sat down in front of her. She glanced at the infant and chuckled. "Are you used to being home?" Shen Manting lowered her head and smiled awkwardly. "I'm fine. We're family. Manting, I really like you. Don't be so reserved at home in the future. You're a good child, and the infant doesn't want you to be too harsh on yourself." Mrs. Shen put down her cup and looked at her. "Everyone welcomes you back. Forget all the unhappiness you had in the past." "Okay." Shen Manting responded in a low voice. Then, she held the infant in her arms and fell silent. Mrs. Shen looked at her dispirited expression and sighed softly. She stood up and said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early. Good night." Mrs. Shen felt a little sad. "Good night." Shen Manting sat on the spot for a while and soon heard the sound of slippers. Shen Luo walked over and glanced at her. Then he reached out his hand. The infant was taken away. He didn't say a word from beginning to end. His hair was still wet, and his face was cold. It was obvious that he was unhappy. Shen Manting wriggled her lips and wanted to say something. But the moment Shen Luo turned around, she immediately swallowed her words. When she saw Shen Luo close the door, she got up and returned to her nanny's room. The nanny's room was very small. Very small. Shen Manting looked at it and felt a little emotional. But soon, she was defeated by sleepiness. She yawned and pulled out a set of pajamas. Then, she took a shower and fell asleep. The next day, Shen Manting woke up early in the morning. She hadn't learned much during this period of time, but her biological clock was very accurate. She would be sleepy before 10 p.m. and wake up at 6:30 a.m. After washing up, she went out. Nanny he was already making breakfast. When she saw Shen Manting coming out, she smiled and greeted her. Morning. Why didn't you sleep a little longer? I'm used to it. Shen Manting stepped forward to wash her hands. Let me help you. What do you need me to do? No need. Nanny he didn't need her help at all. She glared at her and said, How many people do we need for breakfast? You can go to young master's room and have a look. Shen Luoan? He hasn't woken up yet, has he? Shen Manting frowned slightly. The baby was crying just now. He's probably coaxing the baby now. Go and take a look, Nanny he instructed. See if there's anything I can help with. All right. Shen Manting wiped her hands. She soon arrived at Shen Luoan's door. After a moment of hesitation, she knocked on the door twice. After a few seconds, the person inside opened the door. Shen Manting looked refreshed, clean and energetic. And Shen Luoan. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing pajamas. She looked sleepy. He frowned when he saw Shen Manting, but he quickly turned around and lay back on the bed. However, he didn't say anything. He did not ask her to come in, nor did he ask her to leave. He just left the door open. Shen Manting was a little startled. She quickly walked in and took a look at the baby's crib. The baby's big, round eyes were pitch black, and its tongue was spitting out bubbles. He seemed to see Shen Manting and looked at her. Chapter 2015. Squeak! The baby clenched his little fists and waved them around. Shen Manting couldn't help but smile. Feed him. Shen Luoan, who was under the quilt, suddenly blurted out these two words. Shen Manting heard him and quickly walked out with the baby in her arms. She closed the door while she was at it. Shen Luoan buried his face in the quilt. When he heard the sound of the door closing, he subconsciously looked up. Sure enough, it was empty. The baby was gone. The room was unbelievably quiet. However, Shen Luoan couldn't fall asleep. Shen Manting fed the baby and took him to the garden for a walk. The morning sun was very gentle, and the baby was exposed to it. He frowned out of habit. She widened her beautiful big black eyes and looked left and right. Manting, it's time to eat. Nanny, he shouted. Shen Manting immediately replied, Okay, wait a moment. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a man's voice from afar. Don't let the baby get sunburned. She turned around and saw Shen Luoan in dark gray home clothes standing at the door. It was obvious that he didn't have enough sleep. Shen Manting looked at the baby in her arms and seemed to have guessed why he was so sleepy. He's in good condition. You don't have to feed him the cold medicine. The little guy has a bad temper. Remember to feed him or he will sulk alone. Shen Luoan walked forward and said in a low voice. Shen Manting heard this and thought it was a little funny. She said, The baby is still so young. How can he know so much? You can try if you don't believe me. Shen Luoan said to Shen Manting, but his eyes were looking at the baby. I didn't believe it before. Shen Manting was skeptical, but she looked down and saw that the baby seemed to be thinking of something. He smiled and showed his pink gums. Let's eat. Shen Luoan reached out and took the baby. I have to go to work later. Look after the baby. Shen Manting felt a little strange. Shen Luoan seemed to be in a good mood today. Why did he tell her so many things? However, after saying this, Shen Luoan went back with the baby. Shen Luoan seemed to be very busy. He left the house after 8 o'clock and was not seen the whole day. Shen Manting played with the baby in the room for a while and the baby fell asleep. Looking at the time, it was already 10 o'clock at night. Shen Luoan hadn't returned yet. Shen Manting was already exhausted. She sat on the edge of the bed and soon fell into a deep sleep. The next time she woke up was because of the baby. Shen Manting had already woken up before she started crying. However, the lights in the room were obviously turned off, and she was clearly leaning against the wall just now. When did she lie down? Shen Manting was slightly shocked. She turned around and saw the man sleeping beside her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she stood up abruptly. The baby began to cry loudly. Shen Manting immediately stood up and carried the baby in her arms. Shen Luowen turned over, covered his ears with a pillow and went back to sleep. Shen Manting clearly saw his actions. It was obvious that he had no intention of caring for the baby. Shen Manting was a little annoyed when she realized this. What if she wasn't here? Wouldn't he make the baby cry to death? She coaxed the baby and said softly, "Don't cry, don't cry. Mommy will make milk for you. Be good." As he spoke, he did not forget to look at Shen Luowen. But he still had no intention of moving. Chapter 2016. Shen Luowen was so sleepy that he still didn't want to open his eyes. Raising his hand to hold hers, he turned around and asked, "What?" "Look after the baby. I'm going to rest." Shen Manting felt angry. "If I'm not here, will you leave the baby alone? He was crying so hard just now. He's starving." Shen Luowen opened his eyes. His sleepy eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of fog. He stared at Shen Manting and said slowly, "Aren't you here?" Shen Manting was speechless for a moment. She pulled her hand back angrily and said, "Will you leave him alone if I'm here?" "You're here." Shen Luowen yawned and looked extremely sleepy. "I've worked all day today. I'm exhausted. Do you want the baby to lose his mother and father?" "What he said," Shen Manting said angrily. "How can you say that? Will you be exhausted just looking after the baby?" "Sooner or later." Shen Luowen covered himself with the quilt and said in a muffled voice, "Sleep here and look after the baby. I may not be able to wake him up if he cries." Shen Luowen. Shen Manting was angry. "I haven't taken a bath yet." "Then go take a bath and come back later to look after the baby." "No, I'm not sleeping here." "What's wrong with sleeping here? It's not like you can't sleep. Didn't you sleep well just now?" Shen Luo uncovered himself in the quilt. "The baby needs someone to look after him. Why would I ask you to come back if you don't care about anything?" Shen Manting was speechless and couldn't refute for a moment. After a long pause she said angrily, "How can a nanny sleep in the same room as the master?" "You're the baby's mother." Shen Luowen quickly turned his back. "The baby's mother should share a room with the baby. Stay here. I'm sleepy. I'm going to sleep first." Shen Manting was exasperated. She looked at his tightly wrapped back and angrily reached out to give him a hard shove. "You're being shameless." Shen Luowen didn't say anything and just lay down and pretended to be dead. After a while, she heard the sound of even breathing. Shen Manting was so angry that she stamped her feet. She stood up and quickly walked out. However, as soon as he stepped out, the baby started to whine in the next second. She deliberately waited at the door for a while to see how Shen Luowen would react. In the end, he really fell asleep and did not move at all. The baby cried even louder, and Shen Manting was so angry that her eyes turned red. "This bastard!" She stomped forward and picked the baby up. She touched his little butt out of habit, only to find that his diaper was a little sticky. After wiping the baby's butt and changing him into a clean diaper, she finally managed to coax him to sleep. She then went to take a shower. After taking a shower, he felt refreshed and more energetic. Looking at the time, it was almost 2 o'clock. She went to Shen Luowen's room and turned off the lights. She didn't know when the baby had woken up, but he was staring at something with his eyes wide open. Shen Manting reached out and squeezed his little hand. Her heart was filled with tenderness. The baby yawned. Soon, it couldn't hold on any longer, and its eyes slowly opened smaller and smaller. Seeing that the baby had finally fallen asleep, Shen Manting was extremely sleepy. She glanced at the king-sized bed. The bed was very big. At the moment, Shen Luowen was curled up on the innermost side, his body pressed against the wall. She hesitated for a moment and thought of the past few months in Jiangnan. Didn't he spend the same time like this? They slept in the same bed, and he didn't do anything to her. Chapter 2017. Shen Manting lay down and closed her eyes. She was so sleepy that she fell asleep as soon as she closed her eyes. During this period, the baby woke up twice. Shen Manting fed him twice and changed his diaper once. After that, the sky was bright. Shen Luowen seemed to be sleeping soundly, But in the middle of the night, Shen Manting vaguely felt a strange touch on her body. This feeling was inexplicable, but she woke up several times to see Shen Luo and huddled in the corner. Shen Manting felt lucky, but she also felt that she was being ridiculous. Shen Luo and might not care about her. For example, she had become much uglier since she came here. Moreover, after giving birth to the baby, her belly began to grow fat. Her body was thin, but her belly was bulging, which was very ugly. The sky was bright, and Shen Manting got up and stretched her back. The baby was still sleeping, and his little mouth was slightly pouting. He looked especially cute. Shen Manting's lips curled into a smile as she entered the bathroom. After she was released, she went to her room to wash up. The door was closed, and Shen Luo quickly put down the quilt. He turned over and hugged the quilt in a good mood. He smiled slightly. Shen Luo woke up after 9 o'clock in the morning. Shen Manting didn't know how long she had been holding the baby. Seeing him obviously sleeping soundly, she felt unhappy. Although he had been busy the whole day yesterday, he should have had a good rest. But his behavior of completely ignoring the baby made her very angry. After washing up and eating breakfast, Shen Luo went to change his clothes. He said, "Change your clothes and go buy something for the baby." Shen Manting was stunned. "You don't have to work today?" "Yes, I finished my project, so I can take a day off." Shen Luo took the baby and urged, "Go quickly. It's rare that I have time today. The baby is missing a lot of things. Take this opportunity to make up for them." "Missing? What is it missing?" Shen Manting couldn't think of anything. It seemed that he had everything he needed. Shen Luo didn't look at her anymore. He was holding the baby in a very good mood, and he laughed. Like a big fool. Shen Manting felt a little disdainful, and then went back to the room to change. The clothes were very simple. She bought them last summer. They were a little big, and the pants couldn't fall. From time to time, he would tug at his pants. Shen Luo seemed to notice it. He frowned and said, "What are you wearing?" "What are you wearing? Go and change." "I have no clothes." Shen Manting said confidently, "I used to weigh 120 kilos, but now I'm less than 50 kilos. I'm all big now. I'm not small anymore." Shen Manting was tall. She was 168 centimeters tall and had a voluptuous figure. Especially her breasts. One could tell at a glance that they were heavy. At this moment, Shen Luo looked at it. Indeed, it seemed to have shrunk. Shen Manting noticed his gaze and glared at him. "What are you looking at?" "I have a belt in the bathroom. Put it on yourself." "I don't need it." Shen Manting quickly returned to the nanny's room and changed into a long dress. Although it was a little wide, it still looked quite fitting. Nanny he watched from the side and continued to work. A smile quietly spread across her face. My goodness, he's finally enlightened. These few days of brainwashing weren't in vain. Chapter 2018. Got it, Shen Manting replied. She took the baby from him and stuffed the large backpack into his arms. Shen Luo raised his eyebrows slightly and didn't care. When they arrived at the mall, Shen Manting found a stroller in the trunk of the car. She stuffed the baby and baby supplies into it and went straight to the baby's exclusive floor. Shen Manting didn't think that the baby lacked anything before, but when she arrived at the mall, she felt that everything was useful. She asked the shop assistant to carry the shopping baskets and added one after another. After a while, there were 2 big baskets. When she paid the bill, it cost nearly 20,000 yuan. Shen Manting was shocked and exclaimed, "Baby things are so expensive now?" The shop assistant smiled and said, "Yes, babies are weak, so everything has to be the best." As he spoke, he looked at the baby in Shen Manting's arms and said, "Especially for such a small baby, his immunity is relatively low. If the products aren't used well, he might get sick. Our brand is very good, and many celebrities like to use our products." That's right. When Shen Manting heard this, she actually felt that it made sense. But it was a little too expensive. It seemed that she didn't buy much in total. There were a few milk bottles, other baby disinfection cabinets, and other miscellaneous things. There weren't many big things, and they were all miscellaneous small things. Seeing Shen Luo swipe the card, Her heart ached a little. Shen Luoan glanced at her and saw her obviously distressed expression. He said, I didn't ask you to pay for it. I bought it for my son. Why are you distressed? Pfft. Shen Manting rolled her eyes at him and then walked away with the baby in her arms. Go back. What's the hurry? Shen Luoan signed and then looked at the shop assistant. We'll pick it up later. Okay. The shop assistant smiled brightly. Then I'll pack it for you first. Remember to come back later. Okay. Shen Luoan pushed the small stroller away. Shen Manting turned around and said, Hand me the milk bottle. Shen Luoan bent down and handed it to her after finding it. Shen Manting fed the baby as she walked and asked, What else do you want to buy? To the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor? Shen Manting looked at him strangely. That's the women's section. I'll buy you a few. Look at what you're wearing. Shen Luoan looked as if he couldn't bear to look at her. Those who don't know might think you're pregnant again. How are you going to answer them when they ask? Shen Manting. Moreover, it's obviously an old dress. I'm too embarrassed to tell others that you're my son's mother. Shen Luoan stepped into the elevator in disgust and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. Shen Manting was still standing at the door, looking indignant. Still not coming in? Only then did Shen Manting walk in with the baby in her arms. In this shopping mall, consumption was the first line. Even though he didn't buy many baby products, he still spent so much money. Of course, the quality of women's clothing was not low either. Shen Luoan walked into the store that Shen Manting used to like. As soon as he walked in, he saw a dress that was popular this season. This looks good, he said. Shen Manting, who was standing behind them, guessed that the dress probably cost a few thousand yuan. She looked at Shen Luoan and said weakly, I think my clothes are pretty good. Let's go. Go and give it a try. Shen Luoan took the baby over and held the bottle. Shen Manting was stuffed with a piece of clothing, and she felt very unconfident. Chapter 2019. The waiter quickly came up and said, This is our new collection for this season. It just arrived and shows off your figure. As he spoke, he had already taken off the dress and said, Try it on. It must look good on you. You have such a good figure. Shen Manting looked at the dress and felt a little tempted. The pink dress made her look thin and beautiful. One look and you could tell that it was a small size. She didn't even dare to think about it. In the past, she used to wear large sizes. She carried the dress and reluctantly entered the fitting room. She quietly looked at the tag and was shocked. Hundreds of thousands. 4,800. Shen Manting's hands were trembling. It was so expensive. If she was still working at her previous job, she would have to eat or drink for a month to wear this dress. Shen Luoan had just paid 20,000 yuan, and this dress. But it was really beautiful. After seeing the price, Shen Manting wanted to try it on. After all, it was free to try it on. Shen Manting hesitated for a moment and put it on. She put it on and zipped it up. Her hair, which had been tied up to make it easier to carry the child, became messy in an instant. She simply took it off and let her long black hair fall over her shoulders. When she opened the door and walked out, the waiter exclaimed, Wow! Shen Luoan heard the noise and turned to look. His eyes lit up and stared straight at her. Shen Manting was obviously much thinner than before. But she still had the parts that should be there. Her waist was slender, her breasts were full, and her whole figure was perfect. Her hair was loose, and she looked like she had returned to the old Shen Manting. The high-spirited, proud, and sweet Shen Manting. However, the Shen Manting who had calmed down made him feel even more sorry for her. Shen Manting also couldn't believe it. She looked at herself in the mirror and couldn't believe it either. But this dress was too expensive. I'll take this one. Try these too. Shen Luoan brought her a few dresses, including a skirt and pants. The waiter took them with a smile and said, Okay, then I'll bring new goods from the warehouse. Please wait a moment. Shen Manting felt guilty. She walked over and gently touched his back. She pulled his sleeve and said, That dress costs 5,000 yuan. It's too expensive. Let's go to another store. Shen Luoan glanced at her face and said, What are you afraid of? I didn't ask you to pay for it. As he spoke, he gave her a push. I'll have to bring you along when I go out in the future. Are you trying to embarrass me by wearing that? These words seemed to contain a lot of information. Shen Manting was stunned. Before she could react, Shen Luowen nudged her and said, "Help her get changed." The waiter quickly responded and came over. "I'll do it myself." Shen Manting stood in front of her and took the clothes from her hands. However, every time he changed a set, Shen Luowen would only say one word, "I want it." Shen Manting thought he was crazy. She gritted her teeth and asked, "Did you get rich?" "No." Shen Luowen smiled. "But I can afford to buy a few clothes." "Shen Luowen." Shen Manting stamped her foot and said anxiously, "I won't return it to you. So much money." The clothes in this shop were very expensive. She used to be reluctant to buy so much. Now that he suddenly gave her so much, Shen Manting felt her heart bleeding. Although it wasn't her money that was being spent, it was indeed a lot of money that was flowing out. Chapter 2020. Shen Manting was stunned when she heard this. She looked up and saw Shen Luowen's expression. At that moment, Shen Luowen seemed to be looking at her with an indescribable softness in his eyes. She subconsciously took a step back, and then Shen Luowen said, "Go and change them. If you don't like them, then don't want them." "Don't like them? How can I not like them? They're so beautiful." Shen Manting took the clothes into the fitting room, and when she came out again, she looked completely different. Shen Luowen was very satisfied with his taste. He nodded and said, "I'll take them." "No, I don't like them very much, so I don't want them." The attendant smiled and nodded, "Okay, I'll wrap up the previous ones for you." "Okay." Shen Luowen answered before Shen Manting could say anything. The attendant was very happy and quickly asked her colleagues to bring out the goods. After checking and packing them one by one, they took out all of them. There were a total of 8 bags, which cost more than 30,000 yuan. Shen Manting felt her heart twitch when she saw the number and said, "Shen Luowen, hold the baby." Shen Luowen handed the baby over. Little Moon was already asleep, and his little white and tender fists were clenched. Shen Manting felt that she had had an incredible day. She turned back and looked at Shen Luowen, who was swiping his credit card, and her heart was pounding. She knew that Shen Luowen was rich. But she couldn't afford so much money. It was just a few clothes. Did he have to spend so much? He was a prodigal. Shen Luowen signed, and when he left with the bags, he saw Shen Manting in a daze. "Let's go." Shen Manting came back to her senses and followed him out. Shen Luowen hung the bags directly on the stroller's handle and slowly pushed the stroller back to the 7th floor. The baby products were all packed, and the driver was already in place. When he saw them coming, he quickly sent them to the garage. Shen Luowen and the driver put everything in place, while Shen Manting sat in the car. When they finished, she had been in a daze for a long time. When he returned to the driver's seat, Shen Luowen started the car steadily and glanced at Shen Manting. Shen Manting held the baby in her arms and didn't dare to speak. After a while she couldn't help but say, "These clothes are too expensive." "It doesn't matter. I'll deduct it from your salary." Shen Luowen held onto the steering wheel. He seemed to be in a good mood. "What do you want to eat? Are we still going to eat? The baby has been out for a long time." "Of course we have to eat. How can we take care of the child if we don't eat?" Shen Luowen glanced at her. "Let's eat Hunan cuisine. I haven't had it in a long time." Hunan cuisine. Shen Manting gulped. She also had not eaten for a long time. He lowered his head and didn't say anything else. Shen Luowen carried the baby in his arms and put on the baby's supplies. The baby woke up as soon as he got out of the car. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. As expected, Shen Manting went to the maternity ward first. Sure enough, the baby had diarrhea. After wiping his butt and changing his diaper, she carried the baby into the dining room. Shen Luowen had already begun ordering dishes. She heard a few of them: mushu pork, crispy and tender spotted chicken, mushroom yolkless egg. Shen Manting almost drooled. She held the baby in her arms and lowered her head. She was in a great mood. Chapter 2021. Okay. Shen Manting put the baby back in the stroller, and soon the dishes were served. Shen Luo and didn't eat much spicy food, but Shen Manting liked it very much. He ordered a lot of spicy dishes, and they smelled so good. Shen Manting ate happily, but Shen Luo couldn't stand it anymore. He kept drinking water and inhaling air. Shen Manting glanced at him and said with a smile, "It's no use. You're already like this after eating so little." Shen Luo didn't say anything. He picked up a piece of spicy meat with his chopsticks and stuffed it into his mouth. He drank water while stuffing it and said calmly, "It's quite delicious." It was just a little spicy. Shen Manting silently looked at his flushed face and bright red lips. She pursed her lips and didn't expose him. But she already had a mocking smile on her face. Shen Luo saw it, and his expression became even calmer. He silently moved his chopsticks to other dishes that weren't spicy. Shen Manting laughed while eating. Even she herself didn't realize how wonderful her mood was at this moment. After the meal, the two of them took the children home. It was already past 1 o'clock in the afternoon when they arrived home. This was the time when the desire for a nap was strongest. Shen Manting felt sleepy after changing the baby's diaper and feeding him milk. After coaxing the baby to sleep, she came back to her senses and found Shen Luo doing something in the room. Shen Manting knocked on the door twice, and after a while, she opened the door and walked in. Shen Luo sat on the edge of the bed with a notebook on his knees. His fingers were typing quickly. "Where's work?" Shen Manting quietly walked in and put the baby in the small crib. Shen Luo glanced at her and said, "I'm going out for a while. Look after the baby." "About work?" "Yes, a new drug has been developed recently, and Lao Wu has an appointment for dinner." "Oh," Shen Manting replied. She felt a little strange. Lao Wu was his partner, but most of the drug development was handled by Shen Luo himself, and Lao Wu was responsible for marketing and communication. Why did Shen Luo have to do it himself now? Shen Luo seemed to see through her doubts and explained, "I'm the main person in charge, and only I know a lot of the principles." "But didn't you just finish eating?" "The dinner is at night. I have to go back to the lab now." He turned off the computer and placed it at the foot of the bed. He stood up and said, "Take care of the child. I'll probably be back later." "Oh, let's go." Shen Manting felt a little uncomfortable and muttered, "Why are you telling me?" It was as if he was telling her something. What was there to explain? She didn't have a good relationship with him. The corners of Shen Luo's lips curled up slightly, and he quickly walked to the cloakroom. He picked out a suit and changed into it with a swagger. He didn't seem to mind Shen Manting's presence. Shen Manting turned around awkwardly and put away the baby's milk bottle with her back to him. She held 3 to 5 milk bottles in one hand and was about to leave the room when she happened to catch a glimpse of Shen Luo taking off his shirt. Shen Luo's skin was very fair, and he looked gentle and delicate. Her cheeks flushed, and she opened the door and went to the kitchen. After washing all the milk bottles, Shen Luo came out in a formal suit. He glanced at her and said, "I'm leaving." Shen Manting didn't say anything, but her heart inexplicably pounded. Looking in the direction of his departure, she muttered, "Just leave. It's none of my business." Chapter 2022. Nanny. He walked in from outside and smiled when she saw the scene. They seemed to be getting along well today. She was finally enlightened. She walked over with a smile and asked, "Are you used to being back for a few days?" "Yes," Shen Manting replied and glanced at Nanny He. "I'm fine. We're quite familiar with each other." "It's nothing." "That's good." Nanny He's smile widened and said, "Eldest young master looks much better with you here. He looks energetic today, as if he's married." Shen Manting felt that Nanny He's words had a hidden meaning. She smiled and didn't reply. The baby has obviously behaved a lot these days. I don't see him crying anymore. He used to throw tantrums when I held him. He was very angry, just like his father. Nanny He took over and helped her rinse the bottles. But he's better now. Oh, by the way, I saw old Yang bring back a few boxes of things. They say baby products. What are they? They're for the baby. Shen Manting seemed to have just remembered. Pack up the bottles. I'll go get them. Okay, go ahead. Nanny he looked at her with a smile. Remember to teach me how to use the machines. Shen Manting agreed with a smile. She quickly wiped her hands and unpacked all the baby products she had just bought. The bottles, the disinfectant cabinet, and some other things were in a mess. When she was done, she asked Nanny he to help her wash the bottles and then went to install the disinfectant cabinet. There used to be a disinfectant cabinet at home, but the baby's things were getting more and more and more. In addition, Shen Manting also found a room. The room was empty. It used to be her room. Now she asked Nanny he to help her clean up and put the baby products in it. It was already evening when she was finally done. The baby woke up twice and went back to sleep after feeding. Shen Manting was sleepy. When Nanny he went to cook, she took a nap in the baby's room. However, she didn't sleep for long before she heard Nanny he calling her. Shen Manting thought she was dreaming at first, so she didn't pay much attention. Unexpectedly, after a while, she heard old Mrs. Shen's voice. She was startled and immediately opened her eyes. In a flash, the door was opened. When old Mrs. Shen saw Shen Manting, her face was filled with excitement. She looked at her and stomped her foot. Manting, you're finally back. Old Mrs. Shen's loud voice startled Shen Manting, who hadn't fully woken up yet. She quivered and immediately woke up. But before she could react, she saw the old lady walking towards her. Her arms were wide open and she was about to hug her. Shen Manting felt a little uncomfortable after being hugged. She called out, "Grandma." "Hey, hey, hey." Old Mrs. Shen's eyes were filled with tears. She sniffled and shouted, "It's good that you're back. Grandma missed you so much." Shen Manting was flattered and felt a little out of breath from his embrace. She reached out and pushed the baby. Then, she heard the sound of the baby crying. Old Mrs. Shen immediately loosened her grip and said, "Look at me. I scared little Moon." Old Mrs. Shen's eyes were filled with tears. She looked at Shen Manting and said, "That's great. Little Moon has a mother now." Shen Manting hurriedly stood up and went to carry the baby over. Chapter 2023. Woo! She looked at Shen Manting, who was pouting and had tears in her eyes. Old Mrs. Shen was unhappy and joked, "Humph, look at this little guy. He knows how to act like a spoiled child now that he has a mother. He used to know how to open his mouth and cry." Shen Manting didn't know why, but when she heard that, she felt a surge of satisfaction. The baby seemed to understand old Mrs. Shen's words. He stopped pouting and opened his mouth to respond. Old Mrs. Shen smiled and felt very emotional. He's finally back. The baby will be very happy in the future with his mother by his side. Grandma. Shen Manting looked at the old lady and felt a little guilty. What happened before? Old Mrs. Shen was stunned for a moment before she realized that she was probably referring to the incident before the new year when she went to pick her up but returned empty-handed. She smiled warmly and said, "Don't apologize. I understand, but you're not allowed to leave again. If you leave, our family will be incomplete." Shen Manting's heart trembled slightly. She thought she had heard wrong and looked at her. Old Mrs. Shen stepped forward and put her hand on Yi Qianqian's shoulder. She said, "No matter what your identity is, you are a part of our family. This will never change. I will always be your grandmother. Do you hear me?" These words. How could she have never known that her grandmother could be so emotional? Shen Manting couldn't help but nod with tears in her eyes. Old Mrs. Shen was overjoyed. When she saw Shen Manting's reaction, she laughed and said, "Grandma bought a lot of things. Let me show you." Old Mrs. Shen and old Mrs. Dongfang's trip seemed to be very fruitful. She took out a lot of things and kept bragging to Shen Manting. Shen Manting was confused, but she nodded in agreement. Nanny he was very relieved when she saw it. Shen Longyue and Mrs. Shen came back from work together and had a happy meal with the family. It was said that Shen Jielie and Yi Qianqian had gone to Yuntown the day before. It was estimated that it would be some time before they returned to the capital. After dinner, old Mrs. Shen chatted with Shen Longyue, Mrs. Shen, and Shen Manting for a long time. They didn't leave until 9 o'clock in the evening. Shen Manting had just taken a shower and played with the baby for a while when she heard her phone ring. It was Shen Luoan. Shen Manting glanced at the time. It was already past 10 o'clock. Why didn't he go home? Why did he call her at this hour? When he picked up the phone, he heard the noise of people on the other end. But she did not hear Shen Luoan's voice. Shen Manting frowned and called out, "Shen Luoan?" After a few seconds, someone replied, Manting. The drunken voice belonged to Shen Luoan. Shen Manting had a bad feeling about this. "Are you drunk?" "I'm not drunk," Shen Luoan said. "I just had a few drinks and can't drive anymore. Come and pick me up." When Shen Manting heard this, she subconsciously glanced at the baby in her arms. "I'm at home looking after the baby. Why don't you call a designated driver? If you don't pick me up, I can't go back." Shen Luoan was so drunk that he could barely speak. "Why? You can take a taxi back. Just leave the car there and drive it back tomorrow." Shen Manting looked at the time. "Is it far from home?" Chapter 2024. Shen Manting felt as if her heart had been struck by something suddenly. It sank suddenly, and was so heavy that it rippled. A strange feeling suddenly surrounded her. It was extremely subtle. "Who's your wife?" Shen Manting retorted, but her voice was not loud and soon disappeared. Hearing her reaction, Shen Luoan laughed foolishly and said, "Come quickly. They've found me. If you don't come, I'll be drunk to death here." "Old Shen, you're not being kind. You've only drunk a little and you're calling for help." The clear and loud voice was obviously much more sober than Shen Luoan. "I'm at Yen Yun on Chongda Road." However, before she could hear more, the phone was hung up. Shen Manting looked at the baby in her arms and hesitated for a moment before she went to Shen Longyue's room. Knock. Knock. After a long time, someone opened the door. Mrs. Shen was sleepy. When she saw Shen Manting, she calmed down and asked, "What's wrong?" Shen Manting told her the whole story and then said, "Why don't you go and pick him up? Or you can ask Dad to go." Shen Manting was a little anxious and didn't notice how she addressed him. Mrs. Shen's face softened, but she remained calm and said, "He went out to socialize and was forced to drink. It's unreasonable for his parents to pick him up. How do you think he'll face his friends in the future? Of course you should go." Then she looked at the baby in her arms and said, "I'll look after the baby. You go." Mrs. Shen's words made sense, but Shen Manting still felt that something was wrong. After thinking about it, she nodded. She handed the baby to her and said worriedly, "It's almost time for the baby to drink milk. Give it to him in 10 minutes. "Okay. Then I'll go and change first." Because she had just taken a shower, Shen Manting was wearing pajamas. Now that she was ready to go out, she went back to the nanny's room. She took out the clothes she bought today and picked out a dress. But after thinking about it, it was a dinner party after all, and the people drinking there were all men. What if someone was drunk and messed around? No way. She rummaged around and found a pantsuit that Shen Luoan had chosen for her. After putting it on, she felt much better. She put on her shoes, carried her bag, took a small comb and combed her hair before walking out. She took a taxi and soon arrived at Chongda Road. She told the driver about Misty Cloud, and the driver took her to Misty Cloud Dream. Yen Yun Ru Meng was a luxurious high-end entertainment venue, with restaurants and entertainment as one. She called Shen Luoan, but no one answered. She walked up in her high heels. When she made another call, she saw a familiar man from afar. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s. He was slightly plump and wore a pair of glasses. He looked quite gentle. But now his face was red and he looked a little drunk. "Lao Wu." Shen Manting walked over and called out, "Where's Shen Luoan?" Lao Wu looked up and saw Shen Manting. He found her familiar. After a while, he remembered who she was and said, "Oh, Manting. You've changed so much that I almost couldn't recognize you." Shen Manting could only smile and ask again, "Where is Shen Luoan?" "He's still in there. These people are too good at drinking. I can't beat them." Shen Manting waved his hand and looked like he was about to vomit. Shen Manting took a step back and frowned. Shen Manting took a rest for a while, then said drunkenly, "Let's go and save Shen." He stumbled forward and mumbled, It's not the same, it's not the same. As soon as they entered the private room, there was a strong smell of cigarettes and alcohol. Someone was singing, and the table was full of good food and wine. Shen Luoan was lying on the table, holding a bottle of white wine in his hand. Shen, your woman is here to pick you up, Shen Manting said in a loud voice. Shen Luo immediately raised his head and saw Shen Manting from afar. He grinned and said, "She's here." As he said that, he supported himself with the bottle and tried to stand up. But his body went limp and he almost fell again. Shen Manting quickly went up and held him steadily. Shen Luoan slightly turned sideways and hugged her waist. Shen Manting was suddenly hugged, and her whole body tightened. Then, Shen Luoan buried his face in her gorgeous hair and inhaled deeply. Shen Manting's face turned red and she took a step back. She whispered anxiously, "What are you doing? There are so many people." "Hey, if you want to be intimate, go home." A fat man who looked like a boss waved his hand in disgust. "How much did you drink? This genius can't hold his liquor well. Take him away." Shen Luoan didn't seem to hear it. He was a little intoxicated and said with a smile, "I missed you so much." Shen Manting's face was a little hot. She pushed his face away and said, "Let go." Shen Luoan didn't let go. He reached out and put his hand on her shoulder to help her stand up. "How much did you drink? You're like this." Shen Manting frowned and dragged him up. Shen Luoan's feet were a little unstable, and then his whole body almost fell on top of her. He looked thin, but he was a man after all, and his weight was not light. Shen Manting staggered under his weight, but she soon straightened up and said angrily, "Why did you drink so much? It was delicious." "Hey, you're too fierce," Lao Wu laughed. "Old Shen also has such a day. Women should be gentle. Although old Shen is easy to bully, don't bully your man like this. There are so many people here. You can go home and do whatever you want behind closed doors." "Ha ha ha. You don't say." "Maybe she looks fierce, but she is very gentle in the room. Otherwise, how could old Shen be defeated by her?" Shen Manting's face flushed with embarrassment as they teased each other. She stopped talking and put Shen Luoan's hand on her shoulder. Then she carried him out of the room. The people in the private room continued to drink, laughing as they watched their backs. Shen Luoan was drunk. When he heard their words, the thirst in his heart became stronger. He glanced at Shen Manting's face. It was pink and very tempting. Shen Luoan's eyes were fixed on her. He blinked and looked at her, licking his lips. But soon he forced himself to turn his head, as if to hypnotize himself, and said, "Let's go home." Shen Manting supported him and muttered, "You can't drink. Why did you drink so much? I still have to serve you when we go home. You'll be in trouble if the baby is affected by the smell of alcohol." Shen Luoan chuckled. Shen Manting was puzzled by his laughter and asked, "Where's the car?" "In the garage. -1 and -2. 2. When they arrived at the garage, Shen Manting held the key for a long time before she found the car. She helped him into the front passenger seat, then went to the driver's seat and buckled the seat belt for him. However, she accidentally met his hazy and blurred eyes. Shen Luoan licked his lips. In a flash, he reached out and pinched her chin. He slightly tilted his head and kissed her lips. "It's the end of the month. Don't waste your monthly tickets. Give them to me." Chapter 2025. In an instant, Shen Manting's mouth was filled with the strong smell of alcohol and tobacco. She opened her eyes wide in disbelief. She subconsciously broke free from him, but as soon as she stretched out her hand and placed it on his chest, she was pushed back by Shen Luoan. "Ugh!" Shen Manting struggled uneasily and tried to push him away with both hands on his shoulders. However, Shen Luoan's arm not only did not loosen, but he squeezed it even tighter. Shen Manting frowned in pain. All the resistance and disgust in her heart broke out at this moment. She closed her mouth forcefully, and immediately her mouth was filled with the smell of blood. Shen Luoan frowned and looked at Shen Manting in front of him with a pair of amber eyes. He was a little confused and a little confused. Shen Manting frowned and used all her strength to push him away. Shen Luoan was pushed, and his head hit the car window. Bang! It was a clear and dull sound. Shen Manting retched and immediately opened the car door with her hands covering her mouth. She wiped her mouth, and blood mixed with saliva. Her mouth was still filled with the smell of alcohol and tobacco. It was so disgusting that it made her want to vomit. After resting for a while, nothing came out of his mouth. Shen Manting turned her head back. However, she found that Shen Luoan was still in the same position, motionless. She opened the car door and walked in. Shen Manting reached out and pushed Shen Luoan. Shen Luoan? But Shen Luoan was still motionless. It looked like he was asleep? Or did he just hit the car window and passed out? Shen Luoan? Shen Manting felt that something was wrong, and she pushed him hard. Still, there was no reaction. She reached out and raised his head. At a glance, she saw a bloody luster in the gap of his mouth. Startled, she immediately pulled out a tissue and wiped his mouth. The tissue was full of blood. Did she use too much force just now? Shen Manting's heart inexplicably surged with guilt. He was drunk, but she was sober. Maybe he didn't even know what he was doing. She tried to open his mouth, but his teeth were so tightly clenched that she couldn't open them. Shen Manting had to use the stupidest method to wipe his mouth. After a while, when the traces of blood had lessened, he started the car. She drove home and parked the car in the courtyard. Then, she got out of the car and helped him out. Shen Luoan was very heavy, but he was still conscious. His body was pressed against hers, and he knew that he had to move a few steps. He opened his eyes slightly and stared at Shen Manting. Shen Manting felt a little uncomfortable under his gaze. She glared at him and made him lean against the wall before pressing the doorbell. Mrs. Shen quickly came to open the door. Her hands were empty. The baby must have fallen asleep. When he saw Shen Luoan, he frowned and said, "Why did you drink so much? You know you can't drink." "Mom, help me make a glass of honey water to sober him up." Shen Manting carried him on her shoulder and resisted the urge to throw him down. Mrs. Shen quickly replied, "I'll help you get him inside first." Shen Luoan wasn't in a good state, but as soon as he entered the house, he seemed to be more clear-headed. "Go to sleep," Shen Luoan said in a drunken voice. I'll go take a shower first." Mrs. Shen panicked when she heard that. "How can you take a shower in such a state? Go lie down and sleep." "No, I can't. The baby is in there. I smell like alcohol. The baby will feel uncomfortable." Shen Luoan had already taken off his suit as he spoke. He let go of Shen Manting and stumbled into the room. Mrs. Shen hurried to hold him, but she was pushed away. Shen Manting watched from behind and felt angry. She said, "Why did you drink so much when you can't drink? Why are you acting like a drunkard now?" Shen Luoan looked back and said nothing. However, he suddenly stuck out his tongue and touched it. Shen Manting felt her heart skip a beat when she saw his action. She subconsciously glanced at Mrs. Shen and quickly went up to help Shen Luoan into the room. Shen Luoan didn't push her away. He was very cooperative. However, as soon as he entered the room, he closed the door. He turned around and pressed Shen Manting against the door. Shen Manting was shocked and said, "What are you doing?" Shen Luoan's amber eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of fog. When he heard Shen Manting's voice, he stared at her for a long time before he stuck out his tongue and said, "My tongue hurts." His voice was muffled, but his tongue clearly appeared in front of Shen Manting. Shen Manting glanced at it and squinted at him. She then said, "What does it have to do with me? I just dreamed that you bit me." Shen Luoan looked at her with a face full of accusation. Shen Manting glared at him and pushed him away angrily. She shouted, "Don't you know what you've done? How dare you criticize me?" Shen Luoan looked dissatisfied and said with a straight face, "You can't." Shen Manting was even more puzzled. She wanted to push him away, but Shen Luoan seemed to be very sober. She couldn't push him away at all. "Go away." Shen Manting was annoyed and shouted in a low voice, "The child is still sleeping. Don't force me to quarrel with you." When Shen Luoan heard this, his drunken eyes became even redder. He looked at her with a few strands of tears in his eyes. Shen Manting had never seen Shen Luoan like this. She was shocked and hurriedly shouted, "What are you doing?" However, Shen Luoan seemed to be in great pain and pressed down. Shen Manting was even more shocked. Before she could react, Shen Luoen's face was pressed against her shoulder. I just dreamed that you kissed me. Shen Luoen's voice was hazy with drunkenness. His face was pressed against her shoulder, so his voice was also muffled. However, Shen Manting heard it clearly. She pulled her face and pushed his face away with her hand. She said angrily, Go away. No. Shen Luoen didn't go away. He slightly pressed his body against her and said in a choked nasal voice, I miss you so much. I won't go away. Shen Manting's heart fluttered, and she was momentarily stunned. Shen Luoen just lay there quietly, his big hand grabbing the clothes around her waist. He bent over and lowered his head. He looked a little embarrassed, reeking of alcohol. He didn't look like Shen Luoen at all. Shen Manting looked down at him and gently pushed him away. You can take a bath now. I don't want to take a bath. Shen Luoen's voice was low and sounded a little coquettish. You were the one who said you wanted to take a bath just now. Shen Manting felt annoyed. Get up. Chapter 2026. Shen Manting's voice was low and full of grievance. Shen Manting's heart ached. She subconsciously looked at the baby lying quietly in the crib. The baby and the baby were both in the room. The baby was lying quietly, but the big one was holding onto her tightly. Don't go, Shen Luoen's voice was muffled with a strong nasal sound. Stay, the baby and I need you. Shen Manting felt a surge of sadness from the back of her head to the tip of her nose. Her eyes were dry and she almost shed tears. Don't go, don't go. Shen Manting raised her hand and gently hugged him. She whispered, Go to sleep first. Don't go. Shen Luoen seemed to be drunk. He grabbed her clothes and murmured with his head down. He only knew how to repeat this sentence and these few words. Let go of me first. Don't go. Shen Luoen. Don't go. Shen Manting's eyes were slightly red. She hugged him and whispered, Don't go. Shen Luoen seemed to have gotten the answer he wanted. Then, his body loosened and he completely fell on top of her body. Shen Manting was startled. She cried out in alarm and hurriedly supported him. It took her a lot of effort to half support and half drag him to the bed. His body reeked of alcohol. Shen Manting took off his shoes and then began to unbutton his shirt. She poured warm water for him to wipe his hands and face. Finally, after unbuckling his belt, she stuffed him into the innermost part of the bed. Shen Luoen was snoring slightly. It seemed that he was sleeping soundly. Shen Manting sighed heavily. After going to her room to change into a set of pajamas, she brought in the honey water that Mrs. Shen had prepared. After pulling him a few times and finding that she couldn't move him, Shen Manting gave up the idea of pouring him water. She took off her shoes and lay on the bed. She fell asleep in a daze. In the middle of the night, the baby didn't wake her up, but she was awakened by a suffocating feeling. Shen Luoen hugged her tightly in his arms. He used a lot of strength. Shen Manting gasped uncomfortably. She pried his hand away and shouted, Shen Luoen, let go. Shen Luoen's hand was pulled away, and Shen Manting immediately flipped him over. Shen Manting heard the baby crying. She had no choice but to get up and turn on the lights. She fed the baby milk and changed his diaper. When she was about to turn off the lights, she suddenly saw Shen Luoen on the bed staring at her. Shen Manting's heart thumped and she took a step back. When he saw that it was Shen Luoen, he heaved a sigh of relief. Then he said angrily, Are you crazy? It's so silent. Shen Luoen seemed to have lost his soul. He stared at her blankly. Then he got up and said, I want to go to the toilet. Go. I don't have the strength. Shen Luoen sat on the edge of the bed and waited for her to help him up. Shen Manting's eyebrows twitched. When she saw his innocent expression, she wished she could bite him to death. Suppressing his anger, he walked forward. With her help, Shen Luoen stood up and stumbled to the bathroom. Shen Manting helped him to the door and then turned around. The sound of running water could be heard. Shen Manting closed her eyes in disgust and walked out of the bathroom. She didn't know how long it had been, but there was no movement inside. Shen Manting sat on the edge of the bed and shouted, Shen Luoen. No one answered. Then, she stood up and looked inside. Unexpectedly, Shen Luoan was sitting in the bathtub with his eyes closed. It seemed that he had fallen asleep. Shen Manting couldn't bear it anymore. She covered her face and scolded, "Damn it!" She walked forward and turned on the shower head angrily. Then, she poured the shower head on his head. Shen Luoan seemed to be startled. His whole body twitched. Then, he opened his eyes and looked at her. He was confused and hazy. There seemed to be some doubt in his eyes. Shen Manting said angrily, "Get up and go back to sleep." Shen Luoan's hair was wet. When he heard this, he wiped his hair in confusion. Then, he turned his head and took a bottle of shampoo and squeezed it twice. Shen Manting suddenly had a bad feeling. "What are you doing?" As expected, Shen Luoan didn't say anything and rubbed the shampoo on his head. Oh my God! Shen Manting was going crazy. She immediately reached out and pulled his hand down. She exclaimed, "Shen Luoan." Shen Luoan didn't seem to notice anything wrong. He asked in confusion, "What?" Shen Manting was extremely sleepy. When she saw his confused look, her temper seemed to be blocked. She couldn't say anything. She had no choice but to squat down and turn on the hot water. She cursed in a low voice, "I really owe you." She washed the shampoo off his head and squeezed some shampoo into his hair. After washing his hair clean, she pulled the shampoo over. She rubbed it hard on his body as if she was taking revenge. Shen Luoan frowned and pulled her hand. He said in a low and aggrieved voice, "It hurts." He looked as if Shen Manting had done something unforgivable. Shen Manting's heart suddenly softened. She involuntarily loosened her grip. She reached out and unbuttoned his pants. She said angrily, "Take it off yourself." Shen Luoan tugged twice. Then, he clumsily pulled his pants down to his knees and stopped moving. Shen Manting rolled her eyes at the sky. Then she roared, "Are you King drunk or stupid?" Her voice was so loud that the baby woke up in fright. Sobbing sounds could be heard. Shen Manting was shocked. Then she turned around and glared at him. "Go to hell." She threw the disheveled hair on him. Then, she stood up and walked in the direction of the baby. The baby opened his eyes helplessly and was at a loss. He looked a little like Shen Luoan just now. Shen Manting's heart softened slightly. At the same time, she felt very annoyed. She patiently coaxed the baby to sleep and gently put him back. She turned around and returned to the bathroom. She saw that Shen Luoan had already washed himself. He had also taken off his pants. At this moment, he was holding the shower head with both hands and washing it down his neck. He smiled when he saw her. However, his smile was indescribably silly. Shen Manting snorted. She grabbed a bath towel and turned off the water. Then she covered his head with it. Shen Luoan took off the bath towel. Then, he was pulled up by Shen Manting. Shen Manting said, "Come out." Shen Luoan was very obedient. He stepped forward obediently. Shen Manting wiped his body. Inadvertently, she found that there seemed to be some signs of standing on his naked body. She tensed up and looked up at Shen Luoan. Shen Luoan suddenly reached out and grabbed the bath towel in her hand. He took a step back and said, "Don't peek at me." Chapter 2027. Shen Luoan fell flat on his back. The towel fell to the ground, and she lay down on the bed. He didn't even try to hide it. Shen Manting walked over and glanced at him. But it seemed to be an illusion. She blushed and immediately looked away. Pervert! Shen Manting covered him with the blanket, turned off the light, and lay down. Shen Manting was exhausted. As soon as she lay down, she closed her eyes and soon fell asleep. She slept with her back to Shen Luoan. But in the middle of the night, she didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that something was rubbing against her. She woke up with a start and turned around. Shen Luoan was lying quietly on the bed. His hand was pressed against the blanket on his waist. Shen Manting yawned and then turned to face him and continued to sleep. Nothing happened until dawn. During this period, the baby woke up once, but it was quickly resolved. When Shen Manting got up, Shen Luoan was gone. The sound of running water came from the bathroom. Soon, Shen Luoan came out in his home clothes, knocking his head. When he saw her, he frowned and said, "Did you hit me last night? Why does my head hurt so much?" "You were the one who drank the wine," Shen Manting said angrily. She got up and said, "I really owe you. Not only do I have to serve your son, but I also have to serve you." "Nonsense." Shen Luo and walked over and took her hand to touch his head. "Look, it's swollen." Shen Manting touched his head. It was true. She suddenly remembered that when she threw the shower head last night, she seemed to have thrown it a little hard. How could it be so coincidental that it hit him on the head? She felt a little guilty, but she still said confidently, "It's not my fault." Indeed, it was not her fault. He did it himself. Shen Luo and was skeptical. He stuck out his tongue and said, "Tongue, you bit me." Bull ****. Shen Manting denied. "You bit yourself. How is that possible?" Shen Luo and obviously didn't believe her. Shen Manting turned around and said loudly, "You're the one who bit your own tongue. Why are you blaming me for everything?" "I clearly remember you biting me." Shen Luo and was a little unconvinced. He stepped forward and said, "What did you do when I was drunk? Tell me now." Shen Manting ignored him and walked out the door. Shen Luo and stared at her from behind, his head throbbing with pain. What happened last night was intermittent, so he couldn't remember it clearly, but he didn't forget everything either. Why did he feel like he had suffered a great loss? This feeling was intense, but it felt pretty good. Shen Manting went back to the nanny's room to wash up. But when she looked into the mirror, she felt a little strange. "What if you don't want me and the child anymore?" His heart palpitated. She didn't know if he was talking nonsense because he was drunk, or if he was telling the truth because he was drunk. Shen Manting washed her face. Her mind was filled with the image of him sitting in the bathtub in a daze. What a fool. Nanny, he had already prepared dinner by the time she got changed. Shen Manting yawned and went back into the house to carry the baby out. Shen Luoan was still sleeping. The more she looked at him, the more annoyed she became. When she passed by, she glared at him resentfully. Shen Luoan seemed to feel it and sat up immediately. He got up and walked out of the room in his slippers. He knocked his head and said, "Nanny, help me cook some soup to sober up." Nanny, he glanced at him and then at Shen Manting. She smiled and said, "Wait a minute." After finishing the work in her hands, she went to the kitchen to cook some soup to sober up. Shen Manting sat on the sofa with the baby in her arms and kept yawning. Shen Luoan glanced at her and sat in front of her. He said angrily, "Didn't I let you sleep last night? You're so sleepy." Shen Manting glanced at him and became even more annoyed. She said, "How dare you say that? Think about what you did last night." You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.